Good evening and welcome to the April 3rd, 2019. This is a joint committee between Downtown, I believe, and Finance Committee. Tonight, we are going to first call the roll.
Councilor Kroll. Present. Councilor DeBona. Present. Councilor Harris. Present. Councilor Hughes. Councilor Liang. Present. Councilor Mahoney. Councilor McCarthy. Present. Councilor Palmucci. Chairman King.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Pursuant to the open meeting law, any person may make an audio or video recording of this public meeting or may transmit the meeting through any medium. Attendees are therefore advised that such recordings or transmissions are being made, whether perceived or unperceived, by those present and are deemed acknowledged and permissible. So tonight we're here to discuss the $61 million appropriation for the district improvement financing. We're first going to start out with an introduction from Special Counsel Bill Geary, who will introduce those who will be presenting this evening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and through you to members of the Joint Committee. We will be presenting a variety of material related to the overall filings that were made. I know that all of you received the blue binder containing backup material, quite extensive backup material, almost a month to this date ago. And obviously, there's voluminous material to review, and we will be presenting, because I think the council in its wisdom, working with the committee chairman, arranged a number of sessions for us to cover all of the three principal subjects that are subsumed within the filings that were made to the council on March 4th, and that includes the draft land disposition agreement. That's really the legal component. Then there's an amendment number 5 to the urban redevelopment plan, and lastly, there's the DIF budget itself and the items which are contained therein that will allow us to continue the work that's underway on the Hancock side of the downtown, and hopefully initiate the work, the infrastructure work predominantly, that will be required on the Ross side to achieve our development goals on that side. Presenting this evening will be Rob Stevens, Deputy Director of Planning for the City of Quincy, a career employee who's been at the department for 16 years, and Craig Seymour, a principal of the firm RKG. Mr. Seymour has been involved with the development of the District Improvement Financing Program, the DIF program, and both Mr. Stevens and Mr. Seymour had provided material in the blue binders that would serve as a guide for their presentations this evening. Each of them wrote, Mr. Seymour, a tutorial regarding the DIF program, because not all the counselors who are present on this body at this time were involved in the prior projects that saw appropriations for those projects from the DIF program. So I know that there will be a lot of questions, and that's the intention. And so what we would respectfully request is that each of the gentlemen be able to make their presentations, and at the conclusion of the presentations, they will be available to answer questions, as well as other members of the development team, because it's really a team effort, and what you have seen and will see both in the presentations as well as the backup materials is the result of a lot of hard work by members of this team. You know, Jim Fatses, R.J. Dowling of Woodard and Curran, Tom Russo's here from Woodard and Curran as well. A lot of you know him as our street man. He's out at the construction sites in good weather and poor weather. David White and Steve Crucial, who may be new to some of you. He's the overseer for all of the ongoing construction that's occurring in the downtown area and works on monitoring the guaranteed maximum price contracts pursuant to which the public component of that work is proceeding. So with that, I'll introduce Mr. Seymour.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. It's a pleasure to be back before you again to talk about my favorite subject, which is district improvement financing, or the tax increment financing used to fund the development that's going on here in downtown. What I've got for you tonight is a number of slides. It really takes us back a little bit to the beginning in terms of an overview of the DIF program and how it works, the model that we've created since the 2006 origination, and then looking forward, the forecast in terms of identifying the DIF revenue that's potentially available to carry out and bond the kinds of projects of public infrastructure that's necessary. As you recall, the DIF was established by this board back in 2005. Fiscal year 2006 was set as the base year for the assessments, in which the district was defined, the downtown district was defined, and the assessed value of all the parcels in that district was set as the basis. Each year, that basis has been inflated, new projects are added in, and any new property taxes that go along with that are captured in the DIF increment. This year, or in 2006, the base assessment value was about $427 million. That included the tax-exempt properties. The taxable value of that was about $298 million. In this current fiscal year, it's up to $711, of which $560 million is taxable. That's an increase of taxable assessed value of 88% over that time frame. It's important to note, too, as I'll show you graphically in a moment, that the base assessment remains the same. That's the money, the assessment from which taxes flow into the general fund, and that has remained consistent and has grown over time as it is inflated. The use of the DIF revenues is to incentivize new private investment in the downtown through the construction of public infrastructure. These are the roads, the streets, the parking that's needed, the underground utilities, all of that stuff that's necessary to set the stage for private investors to come in and invest their money in these new real estate projects. Important point to recognize here is Quincy is very unique in terms of downtown redevelopment and use of the DIF project. And the reason for that is you own the Hancock lot and the Ross Garage site. You own the largest pieces of property in downtown, therefore you're a player. The city here sits at the table with the private development community, and rather than just advising and trying to direct things from the sides through your zoning and so on, you have a seat at the table. And that's enabled the city to weather some of the storms that you've seen, starting from the original plans that were done for downtown, and become that coordinating developer, which has played a very important role in the process. As we look forward, we are trying to forecast out what is going to happen. And we know, but simply by looking around, there is a lot of things that are happening now. Some have been completed, some are under construction. And so we break these down into three major categories: those that are either completed or under construction, those that are midterm or are in the proposal stage. They're either before boards and committees here in the city, or they're at a point where they're fairly sure that something's going to happen. Those are the ones at the R3, R4, Fox Rock North, the medical office building, and the hotel that's been talked about. The others are longer term, but they're not just pie in the sky. They are projects that have been brought before the planning department and others, and have a grounding in reality, where people have the owners of these properties have come forward and says, these are some ideas of what we want to talk about doing. And so those are also included in here and coming in over a period of time in the future in our DIF forecast. The incremental revenue from the tax increment financing from the DIF program covers debt service that helps pay for some of these very important key infrastructure projects that have been taking place over the past decade or more. The concourse, the Town Brook relocation, the Ross Garage demolition, Adams Green out here, it helped do some of the work on that. And more importantly, the subsurface utilities. As you know, downtown Quincy, the old utility infrastructure simply was not adequate. There was an awful lot of money had to be put into the ground in order to get it to work well. My discussion is going to be on sources of revenue. Where's the money coming from? That's what the DIF program's about. Rob's going to follow me and talk about the uses of funds, where the money is going to be spent out on. And remember, the DIF bonds that have been placed to date or authorized by this council to date include the original $41 million, the original DIF bond, DIF 1, and then DIF 2, which you authorized, which is the $80 million. So those are obligated funds that we have included the debt service on those as we look at the revenue coming in against those. This is a simple diagram, but it helps explain what tax increment financing is, or DIF here in Massachusetts. In the red, you'll see the base. That's the money that used to flow into the general fund, continues to flow in the general fund, and will continue in the future. In 2006, that was about $6 million a year. Today, that amount is about $6.8 million, because what we do in our in the DIF program and the way the assessor has it set up is those properties continue to inflate each year with the market. So as they go up, the amount of money that comes into the general fund goes up as well. That way, the general fund is never lacking and is not subsidizing anything but that has been there in the past. It's the new investment and the new growth, which is that increment, which is where the funds come from, the property taxes on those new assessments that's used for this public infrastructure. And remember, too, that the DIF program has a finite life. It runs 36 years from 2006 to 2036. Beyond that point, it may be extended by the city. But after that point, when all the infrastructure is done, all of those funds, both the new increment and the base, flow back to the general fund. And so that's an important point to keep in mind. And just to give you relative values, the base, as I said, is pumping about $6.8 million into the general fund today. The increment today is fiscal year 18 was $4.1 million, and we're predicting that to be about $4.8 million in fiscal year 19, and going up quite steadily from that point in time. Current assessment values, the property has appreciated over time. An interesting thing is the residential portion of that accounts for about 45% of the total in fiscal year 19, compared to 29% back in FY15. And that is because some of the new projects like west of Chestnut, for example, have come on board and increased that base. And that's important because it's a residential investment in downtown that is stimulating not only the retail that's following, as you know, there's a lot of new restaurants and new stores coming in, but it's also going to be the attractor to get jobs here as employers look to locate where their workers live, as opposed to having to import them or have them commute in. The captured assessment, the increment in fiscal year 19, is about just under $250 million. Above what it was in fiscal year 06. Total property tax revenue, as I mentioned, is about $10.9 million. General fund on the base gets 6.8, and the DIF revenue is about 4.1 million. In general trend of property appreciation, this graph breaks it down between the residential and commercial, so you can see how that's changed over the past 5 years. And that the residential has not only caught up and surpassed now the commercial assessment. And just as a point of interest here, taxable real property assessment rose by $32.8 million between last fiscal year and the current fiscal year. That's the pace of growth that investment in the downtown has been going through. The way we track all of this is that we have created a financial model, a spreadsheet model that has input coming in from the assessor's database each year on a parcel-by-parcel basis. And the logic of that model is you start with your base year, you take the current year assessment values on that and the tax rates, we come up with some assessment values as to how much do we value the new kinds of property at. Because assessments are done after the fact, after a building is built. So to go forward, we have to have some kind of way of predicting that. And working closely with the assessor, we've come up with assessment factors for apartments and for condos and per square foot for commercial and for office space. And we'll use those and have projected those forward. They have been done on a conservative basis. In fact, the numbers that we're using going forward for apartments and for virtually all of it, in fact, are somewhat less or quite a bit less than what the actual new assessed values are on properties, such as apartments and condominiums. So again, our approach has been to take a conservative approach and come up with an accurate rendition and forecast of what revenues are going to be. We take the basic assumptions, put in the new development program, which I showed you in that chart before, of the new projects that are known. It doesn't include the new projects that are unknown, and that's actually happening where you have some smaller parcels that are in the DIF district where people are now taking a 2-unit apartment house and combining it with one next to it, and now they've come before the planning board and start talking about putting 8 or 9 or 10 units in there. That adds a lot of value, and that's happening, but we're not capturing that. We're just looking at the major projects here. We forecast that out. The output of the model is the estimated tax increment, the benefits of that, and then from that derive how much can be bonded from that yearly new tax revenue that comes in. The key assumptions are listed here. Again, it's built up on a parcel-by-parcel basis from the assessor's database. So every year we have to recalibrate the model because not only do assessment values change, but parcels change as well. Some are combined, some are split up, and new uses are put in there. So we go through and do that exercise and then apply assessment values to those. And we can also look at one or more parcels and turn on the new development that we predicted here and look at that on a parcel-by-parcel or development-by-development basis. And that's important, too, when the city is negotiating with the developer. And one of the questions that comes up, well, how much net tax revenue is going to come off of this new project? And how much of that is DIF revenue that then can be captured? And so when a new project is brought to the attention of the planning and the planning group, we can very quickly put those numbers in and say, yeah, that's going to generate about X amount of new tax revenue, and that would support Y amount of new bonding capacity for the infrastructure that's necessary. I mentioned that when we're doing conservative approach, first on the interest rates we use for forecasting the debt service. As you know, Quincy is in a very, very, very enviable position of having the ability through home rule that was passed by the legislature several years ago, of borrowing on short-term money on a 10-year basis, these bond anticipation notes, before they have to be rolled into normal bonds, which are then paid out, the debt, the principal, and the interest. So these short-term bond anticipation notes are interest only, which has kept the debt service and kept the cost to the city for many of these bonds quite low here in the early years. But we've estimated them to be roughly moving forward at 2% per year as the interest rate, when in reality they're running about 1% right now. And the long-term bonds, we're forecasting at a 4% interest rate. In reality, they're running somewhere between 2 and 3% because of the credit rating that Quincy has. So again, we're using a conservative approach on that. For the assessment factors, we mentioned we're assessing a new condo, the base year of $325,000 per unit, and again, that inflates up over time. And that is conservative because some of the new condo units are coming in and being assessed at $400,000 to $500,000.
Craig, sorry to interrupt real quick. That model that you're talking about?
Yes.
I don't think we have that.
No.
Could you send that to us?
Well, it's a very large, complex model. Rob has it in the planning department, and we're kind of the keepers of the model that updated every year.
Yeah.
But it can be made available too.
Okay,
Or
that'd
at
be
least in
great.
pieces that you want to see, so.
No, absolutely. I mean, just for us to be able to toggle
Sure,
anyway.
sure.
And I don't think we can hear you that well. If you could speak more to
Okay,
that one. Thank you.
move this over here. We're also in the factors, we use $225,000 in a base year for apartments, $150 per square foot for the retail and commercial, and $250 for the office components, the Class A office space, and $125,000 per room for hotels. Again, these are conservative values because the new assessments coming out tend to be higher than that. The DIF finances moving forward here, as we're projecting things out, is that between now and 2036, the end of the DIF period, we're looking at forecasting new incremental revenue of about $290 million. Against that are the obligated debt service from the $121 million in bonds. That's going to total about $108 million over that time frame, leaving a net revenue of $181 million, which is available for the city to either support debt service or do other things with in that DIF fund. And the question has come up, how much new debt can be supported? And more importantly, can this next DIF request that Rob's going to talk about be supported by these tax revenues? And the answer is yes. Let me show that to you graphically. Here we have the blue line is the anticipated new incremental DIF revenues coming from the projects that we mentioned before. The red line is the anticipated debt service on the existing bonds that are out there. The gap in between the two runs from about $2 million in the current year to $13 million when it's at its widest point later on. It averages about $10 million per year. Now, that's based on forecasts of what may happen in the downtown. That $10 million in new DIF revenue, to put it into perspective, the $80 million, the last DIF round, that when all of the debt service comes on after the bans, when you're paying fully principal and interest on that, that works out to be about $6 million. So what it tells us is that there is sufficient revenue should that blue line stay up there, should these projects go forward. And as I said, with our conservative approach, we are fairly confident that that's going to happen. But what are the risks involved? Oops, what did I do? There we go. There's various risks that the city faces, that any developer faces as well when it comes to forecasting the future. We've got economic risks. This chart shows what's happened to the economy, the S&P 500 since the bottom of the last Great Recession. And you see it's continued forward, gets a little more jagged here in recent months. But again, if we had a big downturn in the economy, that's a risk that it's going to slow down new investment, it's going to slow down development, and something that needs to be at least thought about in this process. We have opportunity risks, and that is that the development community is going to find better deals someplace else where it's easier to get in the ground and they can make more money on. Although I'll have to tell you from my work with the private development community, Quincy is on the market, is on their target list, it's on the map. Many firms, not only the local firms, but now larger regional firms and some national firms are starting to see Quincy as a very viable place to invest, primarily because of the infrastructure that's been put into place, because now it's easier to come in and get a project in, get it up off the ground and sell it or lease it out and make their money on it, which is what they want to do.
Do you have any names that you could share with us?
I beg your pardon?
Any names you could share with us?
Not tonight, I won't do that.
Okay.
So.
Well, that's a big statement you're making, so I'd like to have some heft behind it.
I work, like some of your other advisors do, work for several larger developers in the Boston area and some national developers as well. And where, 3 or 4 years ago, Quincy, they'd heard about Quincy, but hadn't really hit their radar yet. That's beginning to show up on their radar screens. One of the reasons for that is that Boston has become very, very crowded, and there's fewer and fewer opportunities in the greater Boston area. And so they're starting to look outside of that to see where is the growth going to go and where is it happening. And Quincy, because you're ahead of the curve when it comes to being able to meet those needs of those investors, and these are larger ones doing larger projects, it is showing up on their radar screen. That's certainly something that I can say, and I think others can say as well, so.
Sure.
There's other risks obviously involved. I've got some of them up here. There's municipal risks. If for some reason your bond, your credit rating changed, that increases the interest rate and other types of things. And interest rate risks, touch on that briefly. They are variable. They are going to go up. We know that. But again, we've been very conservative in terms of forecasting the interest rate on the DIF bonds in order to accommodate that. In my conclusion, downtown Quincy, as I just mentioned, is gaining traction. And what is success builds success. You've got some very successful projects here. The word's getting out about those. And nobody likes to be the first one in and take that risk. Now that someone else has done that, you're going to see more and more interest. And one of the reasons is that infrastructure is nearly in place. The vision is in place for what downtown Quincy is going to be in the future. And that is what makes it an attractive place to put private money. In other words, the public investments that you have made is leveraging private investment and doing so quite effectively. Plus, you have additional fiscal capacity to continue that process of investing in the public infrastructure in order to leverage more private funds. And it's paying for itself. To go back to the old adage, with the DIF program, being able to capture the growth that's coming in, the future growth, and being able to leverage that, it's allowing it to pay for itself without dipping into the general fund. RKG's scope in this was to take a very realistic and conservative approach to forecasting these revenues, which we have done. We've done this in several communities, not only in Massachusetts, but around the country as well. And one of the things that I can commend this council on and the leadership of the city is by taking your firm steps and taking the steps that you've had and going out and getting that infrastructure done and finding a way to do this, you are well ahead of the curve of many cities that tend to react to projects as opposed to proactively going out, defining the vision of what you want downtown Quincy and the city to be, and then moving forward to accomplish that as the coordinating master developer. So I'm going to turn over to Rob now, that was the sources of funds. I'm going to turn to Rob and let him talk about the uses of that funding from the DIF.
Yeah, I don't want to jump the gun, but if there are any questions on this RKG portion that anyone has. Councilor DeBona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm, thinking about what you were just talking about thank you for your presentation. Thank you for giving Quincy a little bit of props. It's tough to tell the regular resident out there that Quincy is a destination that people want to live at and come to, and that Boston or the greater Boston is so tapped out that they want to come to places like Quincy. It's hard to tell the regular person, the average person that's been here for many, many years, that equation that you're just talking about. And hopefully over time, and this is my big question to you, is the regular residential taxpayers in the city, how do they benefit from this entire downtown development? In your eyes, how do you pitch or sell the average residential person? Sell me.
Let me put my fiscal hat
Sure.
on and go back. If you remember the chart, I had the colored chart that
Yep.
showed the angle, that's the increment. When everything's done, when the infrastructure is invested in and the debts are paid off, then all of that money is going to be flowing back to the general fund. And that new tax increment is much, much greater than it would have been without doing this. So you've invested in downtown Quincy, and the payoff is going to be in a tax base which is substantially larger than it otherwise would have been.
Okay.
And that's general fund revenue.
You said from 2006 it'd be 30 years, right? Is that correct?
The DIF
30
program
years.
runs for
The
30
DIF program, and you said that's 2036. Okay? 2036 is what? How many years from that? Is that 15?
Yep, we're about a third of the way through the
Okay.
DIF program now.
How do I wrap my head around, okay, what about everybody that's living here today? How do they benefit from it? Is there a way that this body of government right here, this city council government could say, well, you know what, let's take 0.1% of the revenue generated from the DIF fund, and let's put that fund into let's put it into our regular budget every year, and take it from there and say, let's put it in the budget. So let's say it's $3 million. Say $3 million comes up, or even a little less. We'll go $750,000 and say, listen, we're going to take the $750,000, and for all the construction that's going on in the city, we're going to try to help out the regular residential taxpayer by taking some of that DIF funding and putting it into your budget every year, and helping out with schools and police and fire and pension funds and healthcare, which are our top 5 main components of a budget every year, which goes up on a percentage point every year. Is that possible? Is that feasible?
Counselor, you're actually doing that now.
Okay.
Because, currently it's last year's 4.1, but it's going to be about $4.7 million in DIF revenue coming in. The debt service on that is about $2.6 or $2.7 million. The remainder of that, it's not used for the infrastructure, and the debt service goes back to the general fund.
It's going into the
And you are
general.
the ones who determine how.
So we're benefiting now.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that gap, that amount is going to increase year by year.
I guess I needed a specialist like yourself to tell me that. Somebody that does this for a living. You do this for a living, is that correct?
That's part of my living, yeah.
Okay. And you help out other main developers around, big developers, is that correct?
Actually do very similar things for the development community, helping them understand it and helping their communities understand it.
So how much do you think, on an average of a year, we're getting towards that general fund? Is this because the interest rates are lower than what you projected them to be, like we were just talking about a little earlier?
Because your tax base, the new tax base, the incremental tax base that's resulted from the new investment, as well as just, remember too, that values in Quincy, as every homeowner knows, have gone up dramatically, organically, so that, President's Place, its assessment has risen quite dramatically, and that money that's in the base, that goes back to the general fund. So that the DIF program is set up to capture this funds, use it for the purposes necessary to make the goals and objectives that you have, which is making downtown into a great place, and then the rest of the money that comes in goes back to the general fund. In my opinion, doesn't have to be earmarked. That's your responsibility on how you budget your general fund revenue, as long as the debt service gets paid and there's enough money out there to continue and to finish the program off. Does that help?
It does. I think in the back of this past year, our economic growth we were number 4 out of all the 351 towns and cities. We were number 4. I believe it was $3.5 million growth, based on what you're kind of talking about, the reassessed values of some of these buildings and structures that are out there that are being assessed at a value that is higher. Also, other apartment buildings that have come online and have been assessed with, like a West of Chestnut or whatever the case may be around the city, Avalon, or new building growth of apartments now they're being leased. So now there's a new assessed value every year. Is that what you're talking about?
And the new revenue coming in from the new projects that are going to occur as a result of the infrastructure, of the new parking garage, and
Yep.
the value of the parking lot, buildings around the parking lot, of the new residential tower.
So
All of
the
that's
investment that we put into the downtown, for instance, the new parking garage, the Ross side, the Hancock lot, and all improvements that we're making is building value outside of the district. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. It's just, that's why we're here tonight, and that's why we're doing this. But the average person that's living in the house that is, their values are going up, so they're paying a little bit more taxes. But there has to be something that benefits them today. I know this is going to be for the future. We talk about it, I know I talk about it, it's the future of our city. It's the future for our children to want to stay here and live here. So building and investing like we're doing right now is just articulating that story that you're having, the conversation that we're having here tonight, and articulating that to the public.
That's why, well, hopefully, the background approach here, I've tried to, make it as plain, as clear as possible and as plain forward as possible. If you can use that to help, educate people in town, the voters in town, to saying, this is why we're doing this, and this is how it's going to pay off, be useful.
And lastly, here, you talked a little bit about the risks. And obviously, if we have a little bit of a dip in the economy, you're foreseeing right now, you talked about a 10-year note on a interest only for 1%. Is that what's going on right now?
Yes, when you borrow money, when the city borrows money on bonds, a project such as, using the DIF funds, it goes out to the market and gets an interest-only short-term note that gets rolled over every year, but it can do this for 10 years.
Okay.
Most cities in Massachusetts or towns and cities are restricted to 2 years
2
and
years.
sometimes
Yep.
3 years.
Yep, that's what we're,
Yeah.
yep.
You get 10 years to play with interest only, and then the bond and the debt service and the principal comes back. Now, it's shortened because typically a bond is for 30 years. If you pay interest only for 10 years, then you pay the debt service has to be paid off in the last 20 years. The principal has to be paid off. So your principal payments are a little heavier on the tail end, but you get to use that money relatively inexpensively at 1% or something like that. And actually, some of the ones, the DIFs that are rolling off now are even lower than 1% from when they were taken out in the past. So, it's inexpensive money to use to leverage the tax base that you're trying to grow here. If you think of it as a garden. You're growing future tax base, and you're doing it by using, you've got your own hard work that you're putting into it, but you're creating value by, doing it right now and putting the ingredients in it needs to really grow that.
I mean, that's why I've been a very positive outlook on this entire project that's going on here from day one. I think it's something that needed to be done in the downtown. It had been stagnant for 25 to 30 years of nothing being touched down there, and now we're moving it forward in the right direction. We're doing it parcel by parcel, but you can see, as you drive by almost every day, you're seeing more construction coming up, you're seeing more development, improvement. It's coming along. People are starting to see it with their own eyes. It has to be tangible. I mean, you can talk about it all day you want until it's actually being built. And actually, people are coming in and leasing these apartments and buying condominiums and actually living in them, and then getting these garages built correctly. So I thank you. I would like to yield for the rest of the group here, but I just wanted to kind of wrap my head around the rest. At any time, I'm thinking about the regular average person that's been living here quite a while and dealing with some of the pressures of outside of this district. So thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Counselor.
Mr. Chairman.
Counselor Liang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Craig. How are you? I'm just going to go through, because I went through the memorandum that you shared with us and just noted some of the questions I had sort of in order and in sequence. And so I apologize if you've answered some of these questions in your presentation. I just want to go through them and just make sure that I got those questions answered in your presentation. So the first is, on the first page of your memorandum here, you talk about the methodology of how you modeled this out. And I know that Mr. Chairman had asked you for a copy of that model for us to review, and I'm looking forward to seeing that, because that was my first question, was that in your memorandum, you talk about how you create this model projection from 2006 until now based off of working with the Assessors Department in the city. And so I was just curious to see how frequently you go back to the Assessor's Office to update your model based off of any updates in the Assessor's Office.
We go back every year to the assessor, and we gather when they come up with their new assessed values, we take those, we sit down with them, we plug those numbers in, confirm them with the assessor so that the model gets updated and correlated each year.
Okay, and then the model that you share with us, will we be able to see that information from the Assessor's Office as well? Like the information that you receive from them to create that model, will we see that information in there?
You can see it. It's a very large and complex spreadsheet model. You'll probably need some fairly high-level Excel skills to be able to dig into it in that detail.
Oh, you don't
But-
think we play in Excel?
Well, I considered myself an expert in Excel for many years until some of these younger guys that work for me got into it.
I know, but
and
don't
they-
insult the counselor. Maybe she knows Excel very well.
I'm a millennial, there you go.
They might
No,
use
but
Like
in
a
all
common
honesty, I know the,
requirement these days.
It gets a little complex because. what
No,
it
no,
does
and I
is-
understand, and I'm not going to pretend to be any expert on economics or, anything that the assessor's office does, but, Colleen is great over there, and I know that she would be accessible to us if we had any questions. But again, it'd just be helpful to sort of see, okay, you have this model here, and explaining in words where you got the information from is one thing, but then actually being able to attach those to real numbers will be helpful as well, just to match those
And
together.
it would be
So,
nice if you could be available for questions, too. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and then just again, going off of the methodology here, is the proposed commercial square footage that you're looking at the totality of the URTP district?
I believe that's correct. I don't have I don't have the memo in front of me right now, but yes, I think it is. It's everything. The commercial is, we have two kinds of commercial. We have commercial and office space. And so it is the commercial space, oh, thank you, within the district as classified by the assessor's office.
Okay, so would that be first floor retail?
Retail is commercial, yes, retail service. And for the new office space, when we're forecasting it forward, we're thinking of the more Class A office space, which is valued significantly higher than either Class B office or the retail,
Why is that? Why is that?
because it's much more valuable. The rents are much higher for it,
For Class A office space versus Class B?
yes.
What's the difference between the two?
Class A is the Stop and Shop Tower, the new medical office buildings that would be going up. It is the President's Place office place, as opposed to the little building right there that I used to rent, which was definitely Class B, maybe Class C, or
Okay.
D sometimes.
And that's helpful too, because again, just in our projections and what we're looking at for future projects coming down the pike, we obviously want developments and properties coming in that are going to be those higher valued properties. So that's helpful to know.
And it's important to know that new properties are valued higher than older properties that have depreciated down. So you may have a Class A office space that's 20 years old that might be assessed at $150 a square foot, where a brand-new one that goes up, particularly if it's a new modern office space that has all of the bells and whistles, might be at $250 to $300 to $400 per square foot, depending. And then ultimately, the way property is assessed is it's looked at the rent, the net rent that comes off of it. The net income that comes off of that building is then capitalized, and that establishes the market value for it, broken down on a square foot is how it gets assessed by the assessor.
Okay.
Standard appraisal techniques.
And thank you for clarifying that. And then, so the next is going to, again, just going through, in order your memorandum here on page 3, you talk about future development basis adjustment. And so with that, what is the estimated assessment value of a parcel based on? So when you look at a piece of property and you're looking to project out to the future, how do you determine what is the best use of that property? And what do you ultimately look at to say, this is going to be the project that we're going to base this future assessment on?
Where we get the use of the properties for those projects these are the major projects around the downtown, is really based upon either proposals that have been brought forward by the owners of those properties, or on the kind of vision planning that the planning department has done for the downtown. And of course, it evolves over time. For example, if you take Fox Rocks, they had an initial plan that you saw for the entire Ross area. Now they're talking about just a piece of it, the northern piece of it, but it's a much more specific plan. So for each of these, we take and revise the model to reflect the knowns, and then on the unknowns, we make a reasonable projection of what might go there based upon the overall long-term vision for the downtown that's spelled out in the URDP and the other, in the master plan and all of that.
And that changes every year too, I imagine, right? Similarly to when you go back every year to the assessor's office, so too do you go back and look and see what has changed for this particular parcel, and, can something better go here that will change the future projection on this?
And we do that because whenever we look at a parcel, we also, the model does this, has to take out the underlying base value so that we're not double counting it. So when we take a parcel and convert it to a new use, the model goes in, finds what that value is in the base assessment from 2006, that's been inflated up, and takes that out because that has now been replaced by this new, higher, and better use. And that's where that's one of the big complexities of the model, of making sure that happens, so we're not double counting anything.
And that's really interesting to me, and that's why I wonder sort of ultimately how you guys land on a particular projected project for that area, because, we've seen, or I've seen in my experience up here, some projects presented to us at a stick-over podium, and that's sort of the baseline, and then above and beyond that, what could potentially go here that would be more attractive and beneficial down the line. And so again, just trying to figure out where in between those two, you guys are able to, figure out where you land on that is really interesting, and we're just trying to navigate, how you come to the conclusion of, okay, this is where it is. It's not the stick-over podium, it's not the golden standard. It's somewhere in between that's conservative, so we're not over projecting and then, catching ourselves in a space where we can't afford.
That's a good question. What we're trying to do is as realistically as possible, forecast out what the future of Quincy Center is going to be. And there's been, there is a vision plan for it. The URDP lays that out in terms of the density and the types of development that may go on here. And we use that as a basis for that. Whether it'll occur or not really is outside our control. It's what the city would like to have there. Because, for example, a private property owner could come, down on Ross Lot or somewhere and come up and say, well, I know I could put 10 stories there of Class A office space, but I don't want to. I'm going to put 3 stories of, just, stick-built, apartments there. That's their prerogative. The way the market works, however, is that the market will take it to its highest and best use, unless there's, a user or an owner that doesn't go along with that. But most owners are driven by some kind of a financial desire to make as much money.
They're driven by
and
money.
highest
I mean,
best
they're driven
use
by
really,
profits,
by definition, is the most valuable use for a piece of property.
Yeah, no, of course. Okay, and then, let me see here. Oh, so the next part of this, you talk about the existing diff baseline. And in that breakdown here, on page 3 of your memorandum, it talks about how there's about $151 million in assessed value that's not being taxed right now. Do you know what properties those are? Off the top of
We
your
have the list of all the properties that there are.
Okay, would you be able to share that with us?
There are fraternal organizations, there's churches, there's city-owned property. None of those are all tax exempt.
Okay. I'm sure I can get that a list through the assessor's office, but if you have it readily available, when you send along the model, if you can share that with us as well, that'd be helpful. And then, sorry, just bear with me here. So then on page 4, you have the model of the assessed values in comparison from 2006 to now. And you can see the gains over that amount of time, but I just wanted to see too, you talk about how you factor in for inflation, but in this increase here, can you actually parse out by dollar amount, what is capital gain versus new development for this?
I probably can't, right now, but I would be able to do that as to what the organic growth within the base is, plus the new growth that comes in. It's all, distinctly lined out within the model for that.
So that'll be
mentioned-
included in the model you sent over, okay.
It is, the inflation you mentioned is our assumptions on that is we've gone back and talked to the assessor, and historically, properties in downtown Quincy have gone up about 1% a year. So that's what we're using for the inflation rate.
Okay.
Again, it's conservative because it goes up and down over a long period of time. Right now, they're going up a little bit faster, quite a bit faster than that, as the tide is rising, because the new investments are bringing up, they're raising all the boats. And so the assessment is higher than that, than what we've anticipated. But again, we're doing this to be as conservative and realistic as possible, to make sure that what comes out of this is defensible, and that, last thing I want to do is Quincy go out and overborrow.
No, and I appreciate that approach. I mean, I prefer to err on the side of caution, so I appreciate that's the approach that you're taking. And then I was also wondering if I don't know if this would be a question that you could answer, or if somebody else on the team would be able to answer, but I'm also wondering, too, if we could get a sum of each individual band that we have right now, as well as the interest-only bands, traditional bonds, and then what the interest rate structures on each of those are, just so we know to date, again, what we're in debt with.
The bond-
A breakdown of that would be really helpful.
I think we have that bond information. Yeah. Eric, you've got it. You've got your own models that run that as well, so sure.
Okay, and then I have a question off of that, but I don't know if you'd be answering that or if this would be something for a different topic. But just in trying to understand what we have right now, that we're borrowing and how much debt we have and how much interest we're paying, I know that there was a conversation Councilor Kroll had mentioned a number of times about creating a separate account that, takes the overs from the diff and doesn't put it back into the general fund, but in fact puts it into a separate account. And that way it's sort of, to put it very plainly, a rainy day fund. And God forbid something does happen, then we can go back into that account and take those monies to pay back the interest that we have on these. And so I know, Counselor, you've been, again, advocating that for quite some time. I don't know if that's actually been created yet or if that's something that is being considered in this entire process.
Mr. Walker?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, it is. At this point in time, I know the mayor talked about it during his presentation to this body when the package was introduced. At this point in time, I believe that the game plan is to introduce that as part of the budget process in May.
Okay. Thank you. And Craig, just my last question for you is, on page 6 here, you talked about it in the presentation too. You said that we're going to be in a place where we're projected to be able to borrow between 50 million and 70 million in new DIF borrowing. And is that projection based off of how many projects we have that have been completed to date and how many are in the works and how many have been approved? And so if we don't approve any new projects from this point forward, like today forward, are you basing the fact that we can borrow an additional 50 to 70 million off of what we've done to date?
No, that's based upon the looking forward with the projects that are either in the pipeline or potentially in the pipeline that have been talked about going forward, is where that money, that amount comes in.
So are you
We
saying?
have, by the way, and it gets back to the other counselor's question about the risk. We have the ability in a model to stress test the model and these revenues as well as the expenditure side, and we've done that. And which gives me the confidence that we have taken a realistic and conservative approach to this, that the money is there for this round of DIF and possibly other uses as well in the future.
Okay, so this 50 to 70 million then would look at the entire space of the URTP, all of the potential parcels that could be developed, everything that has been developed. And if we develop all of the parcels in the URTP, and let's say it's 100% done at that point, so to that end, we're able to borrow 50 to 70 million?
Well, the first slide that had the table that I put up, it's now that $181 million. That's the amount of excess DIF revenue over and above known and existing debt service that has to be paid back that's available. All right, that's not a bond. What you do with that $180 million can be used to bond, it can be used to pay directly, it can be doing a lot of things when it comes in. Typically, what you would do is as that money, because remember, it goes up over time, you would bond in these, take out reasonable bites out of that apple, making sure that each one is, the development, the new tax revenue is coming in sufficient to cover that one before going on and taking another bite out of it. And that's the way it's been planned out. We've been doing this. Remember, originally there was a $40 million, which is actually taken out in a series of $10 million, roughly $10 million bonds themselves and tranches, as it's called. And then the $80 million has been, the way we have it in the model, is a $50 million and a $30 million tranche. Again, just taking the bite of what's needed for what's on the table today and not borrowing in advance of when the money is going to be there to pay it back. So looking forward, it is looking at this next DIF bond that's being requested, and that's a small, that's a piece of that $180 million. And then moving forward, as the market develops and as revenues, you get more and more sure of the tax revenues that are coming forward, then we come back and make another, for you to help to make a decision on what the next piece of that's going to be.
I'm sorry, so just in the beginning of that, I was trying to go back in the presentation and find the slide you were talking about, but it's just if I'm hearing you correctly, so you're saying that our cap, as it stands today with projecting out for the future developments here in this area, the cap is $180 million in borrowing?
Of new incremental DIF revenue between now and 2036.
So, but that can change over time, and so you're saying that our capacity will continue to grow as we continue to develop in this area? Like that number, I imagine, will keep going up if we needed to?
Yeah, well, $100 million is a cumulative total, right? This year it's $4 million. Next year it's going to be, I've got the list in there someplace, $7 million, and then $8 million, and $10 million, and $13 million. In total, between now and 2036, it adds up to $180 million under the assumptions we've used in this model.
No, but I guess what I'm trying to say, and I don't think I'm being clear, and I apologize, is that under the assumptions, if everything were to be 100% completed in this district, correct?
I'm going to leave that to Rob when he starts talking about the uses of the funds. This is the source of the revenues, the sources of the funds to pay for the projects that need to be done under the, that are qualified under the DIF and included in the URDP.
Okay, I will remember to ask you that, Rob. And just, Craig, just one more question for you that I'm hoping to sort of just get your expertise on. But, you've been, how long have you been doing this with the city of Quincy now?
For Quincy, we've been doing it since 2005.
Since 2005. So you've been doing this for quite some time. And, you've worked with the assessor's office over these years. You've seen the changes that we've had here in the city. You've seen the economic downturns, not just here, but, everywhere across this nation, right? So just based off your experience and based off what you know, in reviewing the different types of properties we've had come online, and you've seen the values shift and in these different properties, right? You're talking about the different commercial properties, the mixed-use properties, and the residential. What would you, in your expertise, recommend is the best use or best type use of properties that we should be keeping an eye on for the remainder of the parcels here in the downtown?
Again, this wasn't part of the diff, but really the vision.
No, but I mean, again, your expertise on this,
Oh,
I think, would be
I
helpful to
think
see.
we helped create that vision because we've been advising the city for that period of time. The vision for downtown Quincy is a mixed-use vision that has not only people living and playing here, but also working here as well. So a piece of that, an important piece of the redevelopment, is to get good, high-quality jobs in downtown. And it takes a balance. You can't just put all jobs and no people living. You can't have everybody living there and expect to get jobs. So it's a balance of those things. It's that quality of life that you create. So this becomes an attractive location for employers, whether it's biotech employers that can't afford Cambridge anymore and are coming down the Red Line, and some of them already have, or whether it's, medical, or whether it's, technology of some kind. Getting those jobs in the downtown is going to be an important piece of that. And I think the overall urban planning goal is to create the environment, which you're doing now, that can attract those jobs and attract the people who are going to work in those, and create the tax base and the retail and everything else that supports that in a way that makes the most sense.
And just a follow-up question, I apologize. That was going to be my last one, but now I have a follow-up one. I'm just intrigued by, again, your knowledge on this, but how sustainable do you think that model is going to be? Just because, again, years and years ago, it was popular to, go to areas like South Shore Mall, and now it's more popular to go to places like Assembly Row and, what the space that you have out in Dedham and Legacy Place. So, I feel like trends change over time, and so I'm just curious to see, because you're right. I sort of am seeing that now too, where you have this mixed use of, folks live and work in the same area. They live, work, and play, right, in the same area, and they're close to public transportation. But how long do you think that's going to be sustainable?
I have to defer that one. My crystal ball, when it comes to that, is hard to tell. It's a trend that's occurring around the country and around the world that has gotten a lot of strength. It seems to be continuing to grow, even when people think it's hitting a maximum, sustainable maximum. It continues to grow. And you look at other cities around the world that have had very strong long-term growth, and it's still happening there. So is this a long-term trend? I believe it is.
How many years do you mean when
I've
you say
always argued
long-term?
that millennials at some point are going to get tired of the city and they're going to flock back out to where they grew up in suburbia. And some of them might do that, but then there's a whole flock of new millennials who are going to take their place in the downtown. And us baby boomers who grew up in suburbia and don't like driving anymore are going to come back, as we're doing, to move into locations and continue to work in those locations. So, the model, I think, is a sustainable one. And it's a matter of, making sure that the city is ready for it and is ready to take advantage of it, and proactively to take advantage of it, as opposed to many cities that wait and they start reacting to things and they start out behind the eight ball that way.
Yeah.
So,
No.
again, I'm not an urban planner. I'm more the financial. I'm a numbers.
No,
I'm the
but you're
numbers
also an
guy.
economist, and this is why your insight is helpful to all of this. So I feel like I can ask you 15 questions after that, but it's really just, trying to figure out, again, what the foresight on this is, and how much, really thought and planning goes into that, and really establishing this kind of model. But I think I'd have to actually take a look at the model itself to really follow up with more substantive questions. So.
And frankly, I'd be happy to sit down with you and walk you through it. It might be the best way to do it, is just to walk you through the elements of it so you get a sense of how it works.
Sounds good. Well, thank you.
If I threw it on you right now, you'd be spending way too much time just trying to figure out page by page. It's got 55 tabs to it, so.
But it's all in Excel, and I might be a master at it. You never know, Craig.
You may be used to it. You may be very comfortable with that.
There you go. But thank you for your time, and thank you for your insight. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Lang. Councilor Mahoney.
Can I come back, too? No, can I ask questions? I might have to come back, too. I'm just saying. I just want a clarification for a few things. Thanks. I'm new here in the council. This is my first go-around for this. I feel like we're doing it a little bit backwards. It's just a commentary. I'd be more comfortable talking about the LDA before I talk about the financing of it, because a lot of what you're talking about is combining of all of the finances that we have done. So the first diff for the $40 million to the $80 million, and now talking about potentially an additional $61 million. You're kind of combining it all, correct?
Yes.
And more. I guess when you said people are starting to notice Quincy, development's happening, Quincy is starting to be paid attention to. We've been doing this for 10 years. And originally I'm just going to use the $61 million TIF for now, what we had promises 4 years ago that we were going to have 1 million square feet of development that was going to happen. And then we were brought back to, we have $61 million worth of DIF money that we want to have. And basically what we're talking about is a 200,000 square foot building. That's not much. And it's a non-taxable building that we're talking about for that. We have other things, but it's not playing well in the way I'm looking at it. I realize we're talking about a bridge and we're talking about other things, but we've already had $120 million, and you're saying people are flocking here. I don't see the flocking happening. That's the part. And then you said, you work for other places and you can't give us names of those things. It's a little give and take. I get it, you're an economist and you're telling us that, but I get a little concerned with that. It's kind of like when you have a home and you have a lot of equity. You get told this all the time in Quincy. Your house is, you're house rich, cash poor. You don't have cash in your pocket, but your house is worth a lot of money. That's what you're here telling us today, is that we have enough that we can keep taking out this money and keep developing Quincy. But we also were promised 4 years ago with Foxrock that we were going to have $1 million square feet of development, but really this LDA has 200,000 square feet. So I'm a little confused by that, because we're taking out $61 million, and there's a lot of stuff that's packaged into that LDA, but we also took out all this money, and we haven't even finished doing the things that we said we were going to do, and haven't seen those returns on those things as well. We're banking a lot on that, and it's nice to say that we can take out even more, but I think it's key that, when we look at this stuff, and we're talking about 2006, I'm assuming that you have inflation indexed into everything that you're modeling as well, back all the way to 2006.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, and you're talking about a 1% rollover for the bonds when we do roll the diff, so the diff money's over into a bond. Is it 1%, 2%? What are we thinking of? Do we know? What the current going rate is, and the economy could be changing. So we're banking on certain things, correct? As we roll over the monies that we have 10 years that we pay interest only, and then we roll them over, correct? And what are we basing that percentage on when we roll it over?
We're actually forecasting those on the interest rates I mentioned before, 4% on the bonds and 2% on any new bond anticipation notes that are taken out. When in reality, the bands are actually running about half that amount, and the rolling over is coming in at less than 4%, sometimes well less than 4%. So again, we've said, we've been on the high, we've estimated high on the costs of the money and tried to estimate low on the value of the property on which the property taxes are generated.
Which is a safe way to say it, but at the same time, we have a lot of the economic development isn't happening in the downtown either. We built the buildings, we have restaurants, but we're not seeing the stores come in, we're not seeing the economics play out on the other side. So we're seeing less of that too. So we have buildings that we built with the idea that the bottoms are going to be filled with retail, and we're not seeing that completely stacked against that. So when we're talking about all these things, I think there's pieces of it that I get concerned with, and we're making assumptions that, if we build it, they will come, or if we take out the money and we do all these things, more developers will want to come. But 4 years ago when we started talking about, or we've been doing it for 10 years, and 4 years ago when we started talking about the Ross parking lot, we were talking about 1 million square feet, and like I said, we're talking about $61 million worth of new DIF money and 200,000 square feet building, one building. That's what we're talking about.
Actually, Counselor, to put it in perspective, downtown Quincy has been doing this for 20 years. When the first downtown vision plan was created, from which the Streetworks plan grew out of that after a period of time, and then grew into looking at the 4+ million square feet of development that Streetworks had envisioned for downtown. Then we hit the biggest recession ever known outside of a depression. Hit, which slowed things down a bit. The city stepped up to that, took on the role of being the master coordinating developer, because it is a landowner, and because it has a stake, it has a place at the table, and it has skin in the game, as they call, and has encouraged and and helped incentivize private investment. And you look around at the investment that's here, west of Chestnut.
Well, I've
and
looked
the
around.
others.
I'm not here to debate that. It has been going on for a long time. I'm not saying it hasn't. I grew up here. I watched it. I watched the decline, and I've watched the attempts. And I watched a hole in the ground, and I watched a hole in the ground get filled with the building. I'm not saying these things haven't happened. I'm saying surrounding us, it's been bypassed by all the other stuff that's going on. And when we talk about, we think it's here to stay, or we don't know how long it's going to go, I'm concerned that, there is a saturation that could happen, and we need to make sure that we're staying ahead of that curve and making sure that those things are happening. I really think we're doing this a little bit backwards because we're talking about finances right now when we should be talking about really the package for the LDA first. For me, I feel it's backwards. We're talking
We're
about.
not making any decisions.
No,
today,
we're not.
but
I'm just letting you know where
There'll
I
be
feel
another
about
meeting
this.
about this.
Yep, nope, I realize we're going to be talking about it, but it's towards the end of the month. It's just in general, when you're talking about finances, before you talk about something that you're going to be putting the finances behind. You're saying that we can economically afford to take out 61 plus potentially another 50 or 60. It sounds like $120 million more in DIF money, potentially with what we have with the full downtown. That's pretty much what I'm getting from your presentation.
What I'm presenting is that there is, under the reasonable forecasts that we have made, and conservative forecasts, there will be sufficient DIF revenue to support not only the $60 million and possibly more on top of that moving forward.
Yep. And many college students make that assumption too. If we go to a certain college and you spend a certain amount of money, that you'll be able to afford to actually pay off your debt and actually live in an apartment or someplace in Quincy too. I think that was something that was said recently to me by one of the counselors. But thank you very much.
Councilor Kroll.
Good, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Craig. I'm just going to
Evening.
kind of gather my thoughts here. I guess the couple positives is, I, just as someone who, comes to the downtown as a resident, I would say that there is a new vibrancy. The heartbeat has reestablished itself in downtown Quincy, and I believe it's great. When I came into the council, we were kind of going through, post street works where it was, was to Council Mahoney's point, you were dealing with, a whole host of issues, and, the city found a way to kind of pick itself up, dust itself off, and, essentially become the master developer to, unlock some change. Because, regardless of where you're at in terms of the, your perception of the Quincy Center, I think everyone would agree that change needed to happen in that particular area. It was once one of the thriving economic channels in the city, and for a very long time it wasn't. So it's nice to see people coming back into downtown Quincy, and like you said, a work-life play experience. I was listening to a couple things you had said. I think, the early residential comment of, I think in your example, you had said a millennial comes and maybe they rent here, and then, they may want to, seek a backyard and some woods. The best part about the city of Quincy is we can accommodate that as well. So, depending on where you are in the city. So it really is, in my opinion, and it's completely non-objective, is I think we're a great city that have a lot of good things going for us. I want to unpack a few things with you, particularly, and you talked about it, it was shared here with some of my colleagues. This body has been deliberating, maybe making suggestions. Well, we have been making suggestions through a vote to create this, think of it like a stabilization fund, I guess, for the downtown, for the DIF fund, essentially. And obviously, as much as like the, the bright lights and the shiny stuff out there, it's attractive. What I really need to always firmly understand is the financial mechanics, because at the end of the day, you're right. There is a whole host of risks that come with, taking on a project such as this. And, I feel, at least in my role as, a member of this body, I have a fiduciary capacity to try to mitigate as much risk as humanly possible. So, looking through some of your numbers, and I spent quite a bit of time with your report, And, I agree to Council Mahoney's point. I think that all three of these conversations kind of intertwine with one another. So some of my questions because, it's right. You have three things that, essentially set the table for the path forward. When you think about right now, and I just want to look at my notes, what you had shared, I think you put out, was a $4.8 million surplus right now in the DIF fund. So basically, after we pay our bills for the debt instruments, whether it's a ban or a bond, we have a surplus of $3 to $4 million.
It's $4.7 million after debt service.
Right. So right now, that's trickling into.
That's next year. This year is 1.852.
So the thought was, and I'm just thinking out loud here, and I would appreciate your professional opinion. Again, it's something that we deliberated as a body over the last few years. I keyed in on one of your slides that talked about risk. I think it was opportunity risk and market risk and interest rate risk and a whole host of risks. Would it not be prudent to actually define an excess of DIF revenue in a stabilization count to hopefully mitigate some of that economic risk or opportunity risk or interest rate risk? So in the event, because again, what sold me initially on this program was that it was always designed to be fully self-supporting. You agree with that statement, correct?
I do.
That's DIF in a nutshell,
Yep.
right? If done properly, it's designed to be fully self-supporting. But the question becomes, well, what if it's not? And you actually spoke to that in one of your slides. If it's not, then essentially the citizenry is responsible for the shortfall, correct?
You're on the hook for, once you take out bonds, you're on the
So
hook
a
for it.
debt obligation becomes an obligation of debt to the citizens.
And
that's
the
just.
DIF bonds are an obligation right now.
Of course, right. They're just essentially segregated and being paid for with the growth inside of the district. So the thought now, sort of as we continue to mature in the downtown, would be to capture that excess revenue into an account in the event of, God forbid, because like you said, it's a crystal ball. We don't know what, the Fed chairman's going to do with interest rates. We don't know what the, development cycle is going to look like in another year and a half or 3 years. Does it make sense to be advancing through a conversation where essentially, you are creating an emergency savings account inside of the downtown with your surplus revenue? Does that make sense?
It does, and to a certain extent, Counselor, if I can back up a little bit,
Please.
that's really what the DIF fund does. If you didn't have the DIF program, and you were still wanted to invest in the downtown, you would go out and do a general obligation bond.
You meaning the city?
The city, you, as the policy setters, would earmark the use of those bonds for the public infrastructure
Correct.
in the hopes that the tax base would go up. And as the tax base go up, your property tax revenues come in, you have more revenue, then you expend it out for the debt service on that, the general fund grows, and everybody's happy. You could do this without DIF.
You could.
What DIF is the discipline approach that says, all right, you're going to take some of that growth and you're going to earmark it specifically within a separate fund for those purposes. And then anything excess on top of that goes back in the general fund and is at your purview. And really what it does is provides you as the policy setting body the discipline to make sure that those investments, the debt service on which those investments is based are paid back and focused. So to a certain extent, you have that discipline built into that. And what it allows us to do as the analysts on that is very precisely calculate and estimate what that's going to be. So you have better information to make decisions from rather than saying, oh, let's go spend $60 million and hope it comes in.
But I think to your point, under the umbrella of policy, the DIF also affords you, as a city, the opportunity to extend the duration on the short-term bond anticipation notes. Because if you were, in your example, if you didn't have a DIF discipline, you'd be looking at what, 1 to 3 years?
Probably.
Of a ban, and then
the
you'd have to go to bond.
And the market would dictate that too, the
Correct.
bond market, because it would say, you're just going to use these funds, you don't have any discipline into it. In this way, the market says, Quincy not only has good debt rating, but it also has the discipline to take these new revenues and earmark them for these purposes to make sure that gets paid. That's why your rates are so low, because you have that fiscal discipline. The bond agencies reflect that, and the
So-
market reflects it.
Right.
They think you're a good risk.
Understood. But I guess, I don't know if I'm drilling down on my question far enough. So let's say your debt obligation's $1 and your excess revenue is $2. Right now, that extra dollar just drops in the general fund, and I don't want to say we don't know where it goes, but it goes somewhere in the city, outside of potentially the downtown.
Wherever you direct it to go.
Correct. So the thought process is you take that extra dollar and you create almost like, a stabilization fund, a rainy day fund, emergency savings account, a stabilization fund inside of the downtown. So in the event that your debt obligations do not become fully self-supporting, you have money in the bank to essentially service what you're on the hook for versus going to the taxpayer. Does that explain it a little bit better?
Yes, and I think I see where you're going with it. In traditional municipal bond approaches, when a bond has a certain degree of risk to it, what the market says, the underwriters of the bond require you to do, is to have a debt service reserve set up so that the funding that you authorize and obligate to pay that debt service is 1.2, 1.25 times the actual debt service amount. That's the cushion that the market requires.
Sinking fund.
It's a sinking, it goes into a sinking fund typically,
Right.
so it's there and it works out over time as you get closer to the due date. But those are for, typically general obligation bonds and sometimes revenue bonds where there's uncertainty in terms of the
The receipts.
revenue source.
Yep.
We have uncertainty in this case, but we've mitigated an awful lot of that uncertainty because we're really focusing on property tax revenues from not only existing projects that are coming out of the ground or are out of the ground,
But already
and
there.
projects that are really in that pipeline, that we're pretty sure something's going to come out of those. So a lot of that risk has been mitigated and may not be required. Whether the city wants to set up, a way of making sure that the money's always there from the DIF, again, that's a policy decision. That's above
I
my
get it.
pay grade right now.
It's just-
How you do that is part of your normal budgeting process, I would presume. So,
It is and it isn't, I presume. But anyways, we can advocate. We don't implement the policy. It's a discussion that we're having as a body with, the administration and the chief executive. So we'll see how it unfolds. I understand you really don't want to make a statement on a policy, but I'm just sort of sharing with you some of the collaboration that's taken place up here. Because again, as you get up into the hundreds of millions of dollars, that's real money. That's adult money. That's not for the faint-hearted. And I think we all, in some form or fashion, want to make sure that we're providing as much protection for the unknown as humanly possible, right? And I think that's what I would consider part of my job description. Yep. So, that being said, going through the report that you issued on February 28th, right? And then the slide deck that you presented today, I just, for whatever reason, recall that the tables were somewhat similar. And I can share with you the stuff. I don't necessarily need the answer right now because I know there's a second part of the presentation. I can leave this with you, but it looks like the tables are definitely set up similar. I'm looking at page 6 of the big presentation booklet, and then obviously this slide, which starts with DIF finances. But I noticed in the February 28th report, there was a column, total debt service was roughly $5 million more, and seemed like the net capacity after debt service was $15 million less. So I don't know if something happened between now and then.
yeah, the model, we're constantly revising the model as new proposals come from, new ideas come forward. Between the February and today, one of the things is we had a better idea of what the Ross project, the Fox Rock project was going to be, so that revised it a little bit. We've also been able to look at some of the other things and tweak those numbers with a little bit more information, so they're not going to be exactly the same. This one had $166,000. We're now saying that's going to be greater than that. One of the other things is now in fiscal year 19, this came out based on the fiscal year, I believe fiscal year 18 It didn't have all the fiscal year 19 numbers, I may be wrong in that, but assessed values have gone up. The base values have gone up in fiscal 19 over fiscal 18, and so it's pushing that number up a little bit.
Yep.
But we have the mix of projects that go into it has changed a little bit based upon the newest information that we have.
So these potentially change on a week-to-week basis?
Yeah, by small amounts, when you're talking on a percentage basis, it's not that great. And we're not trying to, the goal of this is not to say, is there exactly that amount of money? Because what we're saying is, how big is that potential revenue, excess revenue, in this case, over the next things, $180 million. A $60 million bond over that period may run, with the debt service and the interest, maybe $80 million of that. So relatively speaking, is the $60 million ask supportable? Is the answer we're trying to come up with, and
Well,
the
I
answer
think
is
in your
yes.
literature, you had said you feel comfortable with basically a variance between $50 and $70 million borrowing authorization at this point in time. Is that right? Right?
Yeah, I would be, sure. Based on what we've seen here. And could go up higher than that depending on your risk tolerance, and what the needs are, too.
Right. But, I mean, again, you're factoring in at least on the February 24th report, I think it was a best-case scenario, right? Is the best case, all identified development projects happen. But you also said you conservatively estimating,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and if you go back to that original chart that had the X's in the boxes of the projects,
Yep.
that's all of those projects coming on in the configurations that we estimated or anticipated in the time frame that we did. If they come on faster, the number goes up. If they don't come on, it goes down. And in the stress testing that we did on this, we've actually looked at taking everything off the table.
Well, I remember some point, last time you were here, I think you had shown a model that if nothing happened, where it would be.
You can make your existing debt service.
It would be lean, but it was still
Yeah.
in the black.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was kind of interesting to me. I get just two more questions, and then I want to turn it over, and I'll be back at some point, I'm sure. But let me see, what was so the bands, right? You have up to 10 years to roll them?
Correct.
Well, basically convert them
They
into a
roll
long-term
on an
bond.
annual- They
Right.
get reinstated on an annual basis, but after 10
So
years,
here's
you
my-
have to start paying the principal
You
back.
backed right into the question. So if for some reason your model was saying in 2 years, we're starting to get a little fuzzy that rates are really going to jump, you could take a tranche, for lack of a better word, and make that a long-term bond, and hopefully, the long-term bond, the bond actually paid over time would be less than, rolling it 10 years to, obviously, then a long-term bond, correct?
Well, what we're doing here is identifying the need. And the need here for this next round of infrastructure is the $60 million that Rob's
No, I
going to talk
understand,
about.
yeah.
Whether that is taken out in one big $60 million chunk or in chunks as it's needed is part of this whole financing program. Is there sufficient revenue, DIF revenue, to cover the debt service, both the short-term interest only and the long-term principal and interest on that $60 million? That's what the model says.
Well,
It
the
gives
model
us a
says
high
yes.
degree of confidence that there will be
Right.
more than sufficient money there to cover that debt service.
And its bonds are always up to whatever the authorized amount is, right?
Right.
So that's just important to point out, right? Because if I was tuning into this, in the comfort of my own home, I may or may not know, some of the complex terminology that comes with these types of conversations. So final question, just because, again, I do think URDP Amendment 5 and the LDA, and then obviously the DIF authorization all sort of are intertwined with one another. So you talk about, $50 to $70 million now, which I follow you there. URDP Amendment 5 contemplates 14 takeout properties, which I'm assuming would at some point be be appraised, come to the city council. How has that observation in URDP Amendment 5 impacted what you may or may not have done here with the $61 million authorization.
That's, again, I'm separating between the sources of funds, which I'm talking about, and the uses of the funds, which Rob's going to talk about in terms of what's on the table now in terms of the URDP, which is also subject to more hearings on what the specific expenditures are for that. But it's my understanding that, these properties have been identified.
Right, they're identified,
Yeah,
which
they're-
they may or may not
May or
become
may
part
not,
of the
exactly. But
conversation.
you have to identify them under the URDP in order to act in the future on those, which is the reason for you doing that.
I guess said another way, are you contemplating internally what that may do to your model, provided that all 14 properties were acted upon?
No,
Or 10 or
other than
5.
the model contemplates that those properties ultimately will be redeveloped. Not all of it has been included specifically in terms of our model, but some of those properties will be redeveloped and their values are going to go up, and that has been incorporated into the model. For example, take the Messina property, the Messina lot. It's interim parking now, but ultimately, in our model, in the future, we have a building built there, and I think it's an office building with retail on the first floor that's going to be built there at some point in the future. And the revenues from that will add into the DIF revenue account.
Right, so will the sale price? Because we need
Yeah.
to, more likely than not, sell that for $6.8 million or more.
Yeah, whether the city buys it or somebody else buys it too. That's the other, those are the intricacies of how these things work. You're at a point now where you don't necessarily have to make all of those investments. That property, Messina in particular.
No, I understand, it's a parking lot, but to have done nothing and not acted on that would have been very challenging from a parking, totally way outside of
Yeah.
your conversation
That's,
with Diff, but
that's next week.
again, and I don't think that, if my memory serves correct, that wasn't financed with Diff money anyways,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly. But you're contemplating what could be down the road, a potential revenue generator at that site.
Right, and,
Right.
yeah, and we're looking at the entire downtown, the vision for the entire downtown, and trying to estimate what those potential revenues could be conservatively. And then the URDP looks at, okay, in order to achieve that vision, what has to be done? Primarily looking at the infrastructure that has to be supported, and then looking at the individual pieces as they get put together in the future, and preparing for those inevitabilities, and to identify the total amount of spending that's necessary, so that besides the DIF, and I didn't bring it up too much in here, there are other sources that the city has already relied on and will use in the future, whether it's the I-Cubed, whether it's MassWorks grants, whether it's other state and federal appropriations that may be coming in the future.
Right.
So, DIF is just one source of revenue. It's not the only one, and that needs to be put into perspective as well.
I understand, but, life from this side of the table is when you're presented with an amendment to the URDP that contemplates potential takeout properties, in my mind, some form of fashion, you will be financing that, probably with DIF money. So I'm bringing that up, hoping that it's a conversation that you're aware of and starting to work through, because again, when we talk about risk mitigation, we all understand that it's about land assemblage, we all understand that it's about, replacing old stock with new, but we all understand that there's a, there's a risk associated with it. So I think, we're just constantly evaluating that and assessing it, and I just wanted to bring it up in hopes that you're doing the same.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Counselor.
Chairman.
Okay, thank you for sources. Now on to uses. Oh, on sources?
Whatever, I don't know, what's that?
He's sources, meaning where's the money coming from?
I'm talking only about the DIF, really. We've strayed a little bit here, but the next section is going to be talking about the uses of the funds, where the expenditures are going to go that will be funded by the DIF.
I may have one moment to see which
Yeah,
section my
we'll-
questions
yeah,
would
we'll-
appropriately
We'll
fit in.
suss it out.
All right, I got a couple for.
Okay.
We can offset the diff monies that would be used for this public infrastructure through revenue that we generate, right? Like, that's not allowed.
If you could restate that,
Sure, the public infrastructure. That's what you're using the diff money for, right?
correct.
So you put a price tag on the diff expenditures required, right? For the project. You can take away from them that, you can deduct from that any revenue that you generate to offset the diff monies borrowed, right?
Yes?
And so we've contemplated using revenue from the sale of the Hancock lot and the sale of the Ross lot to offset those, the monies that we would have to take from diff.
Let me back up just a little bit on that. You have infrastructure costs that you've decided need to be expended. The next step is to say, all right, how are we going to pay for that? One piece of that is diff revenue from the overall diff district downtown that can be allocated for debt service, which can pay for some or all of that.
Right,
But you also look at what other sources of revenue are there.
right. The other sources of revenue would offset
Right,
the
and it
monies
could
you
be
take from
revenue from the
diff.
sale of property that the city owns, that is, because it's in a diff district, we consider that to be diff revenue, although we haven't counted it in ours at all. So that's one source, and it could also be, grants, MassWorks grants, for example, the money that went into the design of the bridge, and other sources that would be brought to bear on paying that tab.
So how are you involved with reducing the diff amount? What's your role in that?
In reducing the
Yeah.
diff amount?
Yeah, trying to lower the cost on the diff.
My role, Counselor, has been to estimate the amount of diff revenue that's there.
Right, so you do nothing in terms of if somebody gives you a revenue number to, because we all know what the project cost is, right? I mean, that's a fixed number, what we've all agreed the project cost will be, right?
Yeah,
So
well,
then,
it's,
when-
yeah, there's
so then when
there's
they-
estimates.
So when the administration or whoever, we're the master developer, so when we are discussing with you how much we need to take from diff to borrow out of diff monies, there's no discussion as to how that'll be offset by revenues?
There's discussion about what other sources of revenue
Right.
are available for that.
Okay. But you don't play a role in that specifically?
No, because what the diff revenue, again, is the amount that the city can bond.
No, I
that
completely
supports another
understand that,
bond.
but
If
I'm
it
trying to get a
decides
sense.
to use that bond for whatever
Yeah.
purposes it wants to use
So
it.
you're the guy who says, spend the money. Somebody else is the guy who says, let's find a different source for the money so we don't have to borrow it?
I'm the guy that says, you've got this much, here's how much
Okay.
money you got to spend.
Okay, okay. That's what I was trying to clarify. So you're the guy who says, this is your limit, this is the cap at which you can borrow, and it's someone else's decision to say what we borrow up to or below that cap, right?
How you spend the money is the city's
Not how we
decision.
spend the money, but what money we access.
Whether, yes, that's how you end up using the diff revenue, and the amount of the diff revenue.
That's somebody else's
Potential
decision.
that's out there is how you do it.
Got it, okay. So we'll just talk to you about what's available in the diff borrowing pool, right? So the base year is 2006,
Correct.
right? And so explain that to me in terms of, so the base year is 2006, that's where we set values at, and then we go up from there.
Let me go back to,
Yeah, I don't understand, and let me just say this in general, this isn't on you. I don't understand why every time we get a presentation from the administration, it doesn't fit the friggin' screen on the front of my desk. My understanding is that the clerk of committees has told the administration multiple times that there's a certain format these need to be in.
I adjusted this to
Talk
that,
about-
to the format I was told, so.
So then why doesn't it fit?
No, you're fine.
Yeah, so I will look up here, but go through it, go ahead. What do you got?
Apologize, I thought.
No, it's not on you. It's not on you.
Usually I do it in the big screen,
It's frustrating
isn't
because
it?
it's a waste of money. What's it here for? Right? So it's appropriate to talk about when we're borrowing money. Go ahead. So what did you want to point out?
Well, you were asking about
2006
the
base rates, yep.
The way the diff works is in 2006, all the properties within the diff district, the downtown diff district, the total assessment of that was added up on a parcel-by-parcel basis. And that became that base, the red rectangle up there moving forward. And the taxes from that base and that base is inflated at 1% a year, the taxes from that base continue to flow to the general fund.
No, I understand that.
Okay,
Yes.
That was your question.
100% understand that.
all right? So as new investment comes in, someone builds a new building, or as organic growth takes place, then that, I guess it's yellow or brown, the triangular piece, increment starts to grow. That increment is the DIF revenue that's available to the city to spend. How it spends it is a policy-level decision in terms of, does it want to borrow that money against that flow of income, which is a rational thing to do because it grows over time, and particularly if you can borrow in 10-year interest only, you can borrow more today to put more money into the infrastructure, into the ground, in order to accelerate the growth of that increment.
No, I
Which is what's
understand
been
that.
happening.
Yep, again, I understand that, yep. So my question was, are you increasing the base rate? What is?
we are.
Right, and at what rate?
1% a year.
1% a year. And why at 1% a year?
That's the long-term growth of the tax base in the city of Quincy as determined by the assessor.
And has that been the growth rate of the city of Quincy over the last 10 years?
I'd have to go back and look at what it's been over the last 10 years. I think that when we set this up in 2006, we went back probably went back 10
No,
or
but
15 years.
I'm not asking back. I'm asking back to when it was set. So we have 13 years, right? 13 years of tax years upon which, between this year going back to 2006 for that year. Has the overall increase in values been 1% in the city of Quincy?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, well, why would we pick 1% if that's not even reflective of what the actual growth rate, the natural growth rate in the city of Quincy is, in order to determine this bond capability?
It was chosen, Counselor, because in 2006, we said, what can we use for an inflation rate moving forward, not knowing what's going to happen, particularly with 2007, 2009 occurring, and went back in time and said, on average, over the past, and I forget the number of years, 10 or 20 years, the tax assessments have grown in the city at 1% a year. And so that was a decision made to look forward with that and inflate everything at 1% a year. Recognizing, of course, that things are going to change. Some years it's going to be higher. 2009, 2010, assessments actually went down because of the market conditions. And so as a result, we're looking at long-term averages, and that's how we came up with that estimate.
All right, so let me tell you the reason I'm asking, and I'll ask you some more questions, but the reason I'm asking is because if you artificially set an appreciation rate at a low amount, or don't even say artificial, if you set an appreciation rate at a low amount, then everything that grows beyond that 1%, you can call new growth as a result of the investment, and then build upon that to expand the amount of money that you're capable of borrowing under DIF.
That's a correct statement.
Right. So if you had set 3%, then the amount that you could borrow, 3%, and said that's the natural appreciation rate in the city of Quincy. So what you're doing is you're taking out the investment, forced appreciation, if you will, through the investment in the downtown, and you're accounting for the natural appreciation. When you set it at 1%, you increase the amount you can borrow through DIF. Whereas if you set it at 3%, which is, I'm going to suggest, I don't know, I don't have the numbers in front of me, I'm going to ask that you guys get them, but I'm going to suggest it's more like 3-4% across the city over the course. If you did that, then you're reduced by a significant amount of money that you can borrow from because you're taking into account the appreciation rate versus the forced growth, right? Or the forced appreciation value versus the natural appreciation value.
And you're speaking of the growth of the base assessment that's there.
Right. So, I mean, I guess what I'm driving at is I think 1% is an artificial rate of growth organically for the downtown. I mean, you just talk to anybody in the city of Quincy and ask them how they feel their property taxes because of their values have increased over the last, let's use 2006, 13 years. It is significant, significant. It's not 1% a year. It's not 1% a year. It is far more, and that's in the neighborhoods. The downtown is naturally more attractive. You have projects that have been built in the downtown area that aren't necessarily in the URDP area that are creating growth. The reason why that matters is because it goes to kind of what Councilor Kroll was saying, that the DIF money is segregated from the general fund, if you will, because we're saying, okay, there's this new growth in downtown, so let's pour this money from this new growth in downtown, let's pour it back into downtown, which is fine. I mean, that's a policy decision, right? But I'm a ward councilor, I represent South and West Quincy, and we don't have a DIF fund for that. I mean, I get DIF has special meaning and it's for special purposes, but residents look at it and they say, okay, you're spending all this money downtown, my street hasn't been paved in 30 years. So by saying the natural appreciation rate in the downtown area is only 1%, you're taking out that other 2 or 3% of growth in the downtown area that could go into the general fund and pay for paving, pay for schools, pay for police, pay for fire, and you're keeping it in the downtown area. So what you're doing essentially is you're creating a cage for money by saying, we're just going to keep this money in the downtown and keep churning it out, even though it's all ultimately supported by the general taxpayer. Because if the DIF doesn't work, we still have to pay it, right? It's not as if we borrow this money for the DIF zone, spend it in the DIF zone, and then the DIF zone doesn't materialize with the growth in order to support those bonds. The taxpayers and the entire city of Quincy then support those bonds, right? Is that what happens?
The city is obligated for all the DIF bonds.
Right, not just the people who live in the downtown, but the people in South and West Quincy.
It is for all the
right?
bonds that it takes
Right.
out.
So that's why I think it's important that our number of the base rate is accurate. I find it odd that no one's gone back to see if the 1% number that we selected, that everything is based upon, the entire foundation of the DIF program is based upon 1%, and no one's gone back to see if the 1% is actually the number that it's grown. Or maybe they have, and I'm not saying you, I'm just saying in general, maybe someone's gone back and looked at it and said, oh, wow, it's actually 5% or 4%. But it benefits our ability to borrow money and support it if we keep that downtown and don't spread it around the rest of the city. That's a real concern I have, is that's great. I don't mind from a policy perspective supporting the redevelopment of downtown, but it has to be fair and balanced with supporting infrastructure work around the city. Downtown Quincy needs to be built for Quincy residents, not in spite of them. That's where I'm coming from on this. So I would like to know what that appreciation rate is overall for Quincy on a yearly basis from 2006 to 2019 and on an average. All right? So that someone can get that? I'm seeing no heads nodding from Walker or,
We got a list.
yeah.
If I-
Somebody write it down somewhere. All right.
That's an estimate that we can get for you
Sure.
relatively easily.
Well, it's not an estimate.
And there's,
It's a hard number.
recalibrating the base, the
Right.
inflation rate on the base or the inflation rate going forward is a matter of being, is it prudent to use a higher interest rate or a higher inflation rate, knowing that, if you know what's coming in the future, maybe it is. I do need to tell you, though, that if you recall, from 2006 up until about 2012 or 14, virtually all of the DIF revenue flowed back into, until the bond interest started up, virtually all of that revenue flowed back into the general fund. And up until a couple years ago, the DIF fund, virtually all of that money the excess money has been available for the general fund.
All right, so
Not all of the DIF is used.
walk me through that just a little bit, sorry. So you said from what dates? From 2006 to
When we started the thing,
2012?
when did the first ban start? 2007, but it was a very small number, right? Yeah, because it was only on $10 million.
When
so
Gary
it's-
came on the payroll, we really started spending the money.
And so what's happened is that, here's the potential diff revenue has been growing. The actual diff costs that were taken out of that
Right.
only grew more slowly, and the difference has gone back into the general fund. And that is potentially what's going to happen here, because even with $60 million, there's a potential for a lot more. The revenue is going to support more than that, and if it's not used for debt service, it's used for something else at the discretion of the city.
Right, and that's the best case scenario. Right, I like that scenario. That's the scenario I would choose if given the option. But we as a policy body here have to also consider the worst case scenario and what happens if it doesn't work out, right? And so what happens if it doesn't work out is the senior citizens in West Quincy, whose taxes are going up, we have to then tack on the diff obligations onto the normal cost of services that they're paying through their tax money, through their tax bill. And that's a tough hit when they didn't get anything for it. If it doesn't work out, right? Worst case scenario. They didn't get anything for it, they got to pay for it. It's a bum deal.
Frankly, Counselor, that is a very dire scenario that I certainly can't contemplate, because you already have momentum. You have new investment that's not out of the ground and coming out of the ground and will continue, that is going to generate the revenue to take care of much of that diff debt. If everything stopped tomorrow, and this is the Councilor Kroll, this was the testing that we did before, if everything stopped dead and there's absolutely no new investment in downtown Quincy, the existing revenue can pay for the existing debt service that's out there.
Right.
That's so.
Unless you used a different base calculation.
By changing the base inflation from 1% to 3% is going to take some of that differential, the excess diff away, and put it into the general fund or obligate it to it if that was decided to be done. It's not the make or break thing on it.
Your excess so you're saying that there would be no difference if the base rate was 4%, there'd be no, obviously there'd be a difference in the differential, but you're saying even if it was a 4% base rate that we were using, that the diff would still be self-supporting?
I'd have to go run the calculations on that, but I believe it will.
You believe it would be,
The
yeah.
the new incremental diff revenue has been growing obviously far faster because it's new revenue that's coming in, new investment that's coming in, and new property tax values. That is what's supporting the use of that excess diff revenue for debt service, is the
Right.
new investment.
Based upon the 1%.
Are
you saying in
1%
general?
is the inflation rate we
No, I know,
conservatively
right.
look forward with. If it inflates at 4%, then the new investment, you're gaining 3% on it over what we forecast it was going to be.
Right, so the 2006 base rate had a value of the diff zone as $298.4 million
In taxable revenue, in
in
taxable property.
In taxable property, which was a $5.97 million levy at that in 2006. What's the numbers this year? I don't know if I saw that in there or if I missed it in your presentation.
You're talking about the base. What's the base generating now? In
Correct.
2006, the base generated, I believe it was 4.1 million in revenue.
I have it as 5.97 million,
Yeah.
which we would have known.
Let me have that in my notes.
This 2006 base rate valuation. That must be now.
Yeah, it was a little under $6 million in FY06. The general fund.
5.97, right?
From the,
It was 5.97?
yes.
Yeah.
Which we rounded to $6 million. It's about $6.8 million in fiscal year 19.
All right, hold on a second. So it went up 5.97 to what?
To 6.8.
So it's gone up a little less than $1 million.
That's correct.
And what's the value? The value was 298.4 in '06. What is it now?
I'm afraid I don't have that in front of me right now. But you also have to realize that that's apples and oranges, because the base that's
Tell
there
me why.
now, you've had properties that were in the base before that are now out of the base because they've been replaced by new investment. So that value that was there before
How
has
is
been.
that not literally apples to apples?
I beg your pardon?
How is that not literally apples to apples if it's the same parcel?
It is the same parcel. It's the value of that parcel as it was in FY '06. That value has been inflated up at 1% per year,
Yep.
right? So when we calculate, when a new project goes in there, what we do is keep that value that's inflated up for that particular parcel in the base. So the base is apples to apples. That parcel itself now has, could have a much larger value because it's new investment.
Yeah.
You take the gross assessment on it and you take out that
Base.
inflated base amount from that. That
Right.
stays with the general fund. The rest goes into the diff fund.
Right. No, I get that. How is that? So why would it be bad to compare the 2006 taxable base to the 2019 to not make assumptions about the level of growth?
Well, the level of growth has been the roughly $800,000 that's gone up in terms of the revenue off of that base, in terms of the valuation. Remember, too, from fiscal year '06, values went up a little bit and then went down
Right.
before starting to come back
To
up.
recover
It's only in
and
the
then-
last few years that those values, the assessment, the inflation, the organic growth of the overall market in downtown has really started to grow much faster.
So at this point, though, because we've been doing this for long enough, and we've been calculating this zone's value, we should be able to get a number that shows almost like in the private sector, you do like a return on investment, but you do a growth per dollar, right? Growth, amount of growth per dollar spent.
Yeah.
Couldn't you?
That could be done.
Yeah, can somebody run that number for us?
We can attempt to do that.
Okay, because I mean, we know how much money we've spent,
More
and we know what
specifics.
the growth has been over this time period, so we should be able to come up with some sort of calculation. I would imagine it's a positive number, I would hope it's a positive number.
It is.
Including from all sources?
In the diff
From
zone.
public-only money or public money from other sources like state money
I would like to see it both ways.
and what the other group that was here before did, right, with the town brook, et
It
cetera?
works, yeah. I think that all counts because we.
No, it should.
Yeah.
But I mean, that will count.
Yeah, absolutely,
yeah.
yeah. Any of the monies, separated between city monies and other sources, so like the I-cubed or the, was it Tiger Grant? It's the one we got for something. Tiger Grant, what is the grant we got from Congressman Lynch to help us with the infrastructure work?
The federal Tiger grant?
Yeah, there was a federal Tiger Grant.
Okay.
What? Whatever, okay, regardless. Okay, I think I'm almost done, Craig. Let me just check. Very good stuff, I appreciate your help. Okay, I think that's it, and then whoever's next, I have lots of questions.
Great. Thanks, Counselor.
Thank you very much.
Okay, uses with Rob Stevens. Thank you, Craig.
Good evening, councilors. It's a privilege to be here. Rob Stevens, Deputy Planning Director here with the City of Quincy. Before I get going, a few opening remarks. In the packet that you received, there was a spreadsheet of the projected costs that are associated with this DIF 3 request. In that package was a number of cost estimates for the implementing public improvements. I do have here with me representatives from Woodard and Curran who helped prepare those costs. And, if we get into, very detailed, specific questions on that, we have that ability to go to those folks. Another comment that I would make, or a few more comments before I get going, is, this DIF budget really takes the place of the city's urban renewal budget. I know there was some comments on the urban renewal budget and what is in that. I think prior to having the chance to make the urban renewal presentation and the city's overall development strategy that is connected into there, yeah, I do want to recognize that that budget anticipates a lot higher expense. A lot of that was from some of the properties we activated. In this budget, there is 4 out of the 14 properties here. So this budget is the action item on what movements we want to do in that regard. And, we can get into a lot more detail on the strategies of the acquisition proposals, at the urban renewal presentation. We plan to have Jeff Fasher from BSC Group. He's spoken before, assisting the city with the development of that budget. Another comment I want to make before I get going is we do list 10 items in here. Putting together this presentation, I made a little bit of an adjustment. Categories 2 and 3 both deal with subsurface utilities, and then categories 4 and 5 deal with surface utilities. But in speaking to the projects, I am going to connect projects 2 and 4 together because they're essentially the same project. One is the underground infrastructure, and the other is the surface infrastructure on that same area. And then categories 3 and 5 will all be also be grouped together. So if you're following the spreadsheet, there's that little jump. And with that, I am going to get moving on the presentation. This is a graphic that was in the package. It shows both the Hancock East and Hancock West side. We've known it as the Hancock Lot and the Ross Garage. This DIF proposal picks up some of the final remnant activities, public improvements necessary to complete the Hancock Lot redevelopment as far as implementing public improvement phase. And then the DIF also, or this request also begins the Ross area redevelopment of creating new development sites where none existed before. The first category that we have here is interim parking program. This is a continuation of the programs the city began when we began closing down the Hancock parking lot to create the construction zones and the future development sites for 2 mixed-use buildings, private buildings that are now under construction, as well as a new 700-plus space parking garage on that lot. We've also had the pleasure, although it has been difficult, to also work with one of the city's longtime partners in downtown, which is Stop and Shop, who had, during this time, informed the city that they are relocating a number of their professional office workers to the Quincy location. If a lot of you recall, Stop and Shop was here in the beginning of this latest downtown redevelopment initiative. That company has used some other facilities, mainly a giant supermarket company where they took a lot of workers out of downtown for a period of time. It's, I think, very appreciative of the city that Stop and Shop has reversed course and began pulling a lot of their corporate functions back into the city of Quincy. So thank you to that, but they were the #1 permanent pass holder for the city's lots. They had a number of parking passes, and we engaged with them directly. They currently have an agreement in place with the neighborhood club to have off-site parking. So there's a number of different measures that the TPAL has put in place to accommodate movement of people, movement of parkers. So we're looking to continue that through the remainder of this year to when the garage is going to be opened with a target date of later this year. We have also, on the interim parking, tried to maximize the amount of spaces the city has in its current holdings, namely the Ross Garage area. We've gone back and repaved, added drainage to try to, again, maximize spaces. So this category is picking up some of the continuation of those current activities, and then we're also anticipating additional interim measures that will be needed because later down in this presentation, we'll talk about the beginnings of looking to site a second new public parking garage in the Ross area. So again, that category is to continue what we're doing and also anticipate what we'll be doing in the next year or two. Category 2 is an urban renewal project. This is over in the Hancock lot. This image that you see is targeting the area at the corner of Hannon Parkway and Hancock Street. There's a number of additional improvements that need to be made subsurface. I think if you can see on the presentation, that green line is additional subsurface utilities. There's TEL data work that needs to occur in that area as well. And that's what that budget line item is for, survey. There's also some environmental work that needs to get done. You know, one of the things that you will see in a lot of these line items is environmental. From our experience on the Hancock lot, it's safe to say that, you know, the city is dealing with urban fill, and a lot of times that needs to be secured or sent to secured facilities for disposal and not being able to be reused. We're also in this category activating some of the design elements that are required to finish that project. The second item is also on the Hancock lot. This includes the Cliveden Extension roadway. In here is where, so this is category 4. This is one of the ones I jumped on. In here, the city is identifying the funding for 3 property acquisitions to create that right-of-way to that roadway. The addresses are 1534, 1546, and 1550. We had looked at trying to minimize the impacts on the property takings, but we kind of ran into the same issue that was run into with the Concourse roadway. For folks that are out there, there's a safe design of roadways. And one of the difficulties in the spot is Hancock Street is one of the city's old ways. It's on an old moraine, so it's a lot higher than the area immediately surrounding it. So as you cross Hancock Street and go down into the Hancock lot, there is a change in elevation. And when you have that change of elevation with a proposed intersection that's not a 90-degree intersection, you have to make sure that there's enough, you know, sight lines so that is a safe operation. As a result, there is 3 buildings that will be impacted for that right-of-way. So we have the funding for that. We also have, you know, relocation, demolition, and then the streetscape, you know, improvements, you know, sidewalks, streets, street trees, those things. So I'm jumping backwards again, and now we're jumping also across the street into the Ross Garage area. So again, we've done some preliminary work there, of course, a lot of pre-development work already, you know, the demolition of the garage, you know, creation of interim surface spaces, and this category starts to get into what's needed for the subsurface utility improvements for that area, because none existed, again, because there was a garage there. So we need to bring all the utilities down into this area to support the new development sites that we're now creating in this area. So category 3 also includes soils and environmental remediation. This is a known entity for the most part, mainly because of the Ross Garage demolition. For those of you that don't know, there was a number of auto body shops in that part of the Hancock lot in the city's history. There are some leftover remnant oil elements into the soil, again, urban fill elements, so there's a number of we're fairly solid on that estimate for the soil remediation that would need to be done in this area. The other category in here is National Grid electric and telecommunications. Again, as you see on that image, we're talking about from Granite Street, you know, all the way down to the Hannon Parkway through that whole length, creating a whole new utility corridor in the Ross area. This we look at as an area benefit. It's going to benefit all of the new private development that occurs in the Ross area. So again, I'm jumping over 4 because I covered that, and I'm on to category 5. Category 5 is now we're into the surface of what we're calling the General McConville Way roadway. This will be a new two-lane roadway that replaces the old network that was in that area, which was, the Ross Way and the parking way. This will be a central roadway down the middle, and that creates, development sites on either side. The development of this is something that has developed over time from the vision plan. How do we break down Ross Garage? This was also incorporated into some of the streetworks plans and to some of their development sites that we were creating. This was also, because I'm going to touch on this later, part of the city's MEPA certificate. The MEPA certificate is an overall permitting document that all the state agencies get to review. And this roadway proposal is connected to the bridge that is now under construction and part of the future circulation of this area that's already been analyzed, studied, and contemplated. So we're following, the city is following through with this project for that new roadway through here. In addition to the roadway, it includes some of the surface elements on the image again. We're taking the opportunity here to really add some placemaking elements. As you've noticed, we've had the bridge now called the General's Bridge, McConville Way, again, a general from Quincy. There's some ideas of what we'd like to see this area become. And we're also asking for, some of the design funding to make that happen. Category 6. So Category 6, we will also touch upon some of the reasoning of this in the urban renewal presentation. But Category 6 is what we believe is the best spot for a second public parking garage to replace the public parking that was in this site previously. We have identified the additional property taking. The address is 100 Parking Way. 100 Parking Way, for those of you that don't know, was one of the original buildings we identified for acquisition back in the original plan in 2007. The belief then, and it's still today, that parcel combined with the city's, Ross lot parcel would create or would be needed in some manner. At this stage, we are advancing the funding through this DIF request to acquire 100 Parking Way, and on the image that you see, we are anticipating siting a new garage, new public parking garage from or sort of along the proposed General's Bridge. From 100 Parking Way down to the train tracks in the remnant surface lot that was part of the Commonwealth Building. Also in this category is the design fees to advance and study the development of this garage. And so the next time, we would be back before this body in the future, provided that, you move forward with a favorable recommendation on this, we would then develop the garage plans that we would be back. There's also soil works in here and an additional clerk of the works funding source, again, to help, develop that program. Category 7, I mentioned it a brief moment ago, includes MEPA compliance and coordination. So the city's MEPA certificate was completed in 2012. As a result of the city advancing Urban Renewal Amendment number 5, that's a major amendment to the Urban Renewal Plan, we acknowledge that we will be working with MEPA to update our certificate. So in this category, we've identified a budget where the city will go ahead and update a lot of its plans. That's, water, wastewater, traffic, greenhouse gas emissions. We will be engaging with MEPA to update that certificate. In addition to this category, we've included the Town Brook Master Plan. This was a condition tied to the relocation of the Town Brook that's already been done. For those of you that have enjoyed those parks down there, we think that's been a great asset to the city. It's maintained the flooding. But what folks don't know is where the brook used to go in the Hancock lot and the Ross Garage are currently, the city was required to replace those storm sheds, stormwater, water sheds, with new state-of-the-art stormwater conveyance systems, stormwater quality units. So we're in the process of doing that now in the Hancock lot, and we're pretty much set on the strategy that needs to occur and the infrastructure that needs to occur over on the Ross side. That is sort of the point at which we're going to advance that master plan at this time. In addition, in this category, I think most folks here and in the city recognize that the Quincy Center T Station is entered a new phase now that the demolition of the top portions of the garage are completed. We are anticipating engagement with both the MBTA and its developer. And so we had put a budget in here to be able to respond to any development that begins to come forward in that area. There's a few other items in there as well. I believe it's the federal busway grant that's now being utilized to try to move the bus systems out of the Hancock Street side over to the Bergen Parkway side that we're going to see. There's some coordination and interaction with that process. There's also the final phase of the Hancock Adams Common, which is, what is the edge of this, wonderful new public space? How is that going to interact to the future development? So we anticipate a number of interactions with the MBTA and its partners, relatively soon here on a number of fronts. Category 8 is, for the slide, I combined Category 8, 9, and 10. So Category 8 is the city's consultant services. We are real lucky to be able to work with a lot of wonderful folks and a lot of wonderful firms in a whole host of disciplines. You heard from Craig Seymour earlier as our municipal financial consultant. We also have representatives here from Woodard and Curran and the Crucial Group. But there's a whole host of folks that you will probably be meeting, some or if not all of them, over the course of the testimony of all of the downtown projects. And we need to keep that going, to keep downtown going. So we have the budget there. We feel pretty confident with that. That's, based off, what has come before on that category. We've also added legal services. There's been an increase in there. And that's largely due to a number of just a number of different fronts happening on the property acquisition piece. So there's some litigation that has occurred. It's common. There's also an awful lot of, and that kind of goes to some of the questions on Craig. There's awful lot of plans, engineered site plans, A&R plans, where we have to research deed. There's a lot of deed work. The disposition of the Ross lot. We're creating a lot of plans. That's a lot of legal work. That's also been factored into that category. Final category is Category 10. At this point, there's one person on the diff. I think at the last diff there was 2. That one person is the engineering manager for the downtown, so we're continuing to carry that. With that, that's my run-through of the proposed projects for this Diff 3 request.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Recognizing any of those who haven't asked any questions yet first. Councilor McCarthy.
Thanks for coming up and going through it nice and detailed. Just a couple of quick questions in regards to, I think I'll start with a parking question. Did you mention what the number was going to be for that second garage? Or is that still up in the air due to the changing?
It's still up in the air, yes.
So-
But an order of magnitude, I mean, at least what we're proposing in the Hancock lot, but we think it could be higher.
700 or so in the Hancock?
700 plus, I think I feel confident with that. But we are stressing, and that's part of what we want to look at, is and we need to understand is how much can we fit? Again, I think, there's a lot more concern with the Hancock lot side with, the mature neighborhood nearby. This garage is along the tracks. Can we get higher in that area? We were concerned with going higher on the Hancock side.
Oh, you're right.
So, even if we may have a smaller footprint, we're trying to figure out what that plate is and then stress to see how high we could go up. Yeah,
Right.
but I would think it's at least 700, but we're looking at higher. Yeah.
What did the old Ross,
The old Ross.
the garage
was-
have?
Right, the old Ross garage was
That's-
over 800.
It was.
Yeah, it was over 800.
Wow. Yeah, because I'm looking at that 1,500 block. I'm on one of your slides here where I know the 1,500 block would be a question mark as we go forward with commercial, residential, or whatever else comes up into that block. And I know you'll have that probably figured in. That's why I wanted to ask the question about the parking, because it'll be, as Fox Rock goes in, and hopefully we get the medical office going and the hotel and the items that we kind of have a grasp on now. I look at that 1,500 block, if you've got a commercial entity in there that's very busy, a parking lot 800 fills up pretty quick. So I'm glad you're saying you kind of have that on the radar and kind of out to the jury right now.
Yeah,
A little
absolutely,
bit.
because, 1,500 that's another one of the firms we needed to, or owners we needed to engage with on interim parking, and working on satellite lots and trying to park different entities that the city's had a long-term relationship with, where, they've been able to utilize public parking. So that's, again, what part of this funding is trying to get at is, what is needed for new development, what is needed for our existing commitments to those, long-term parkers, and then what do we need for, general public parking for, visitors and, to our downtown that, maybe aren't workers, so sort of worker and non-worker. So that's part of what we need to drill down to, and part of what we're looking for the funding for.
And I know I'm probably getting a little bit ahead of myself with the MBTA. I know you mentioned that in this package here a little bit as we start to develop that. Can you just refresh my memory on the parking with the MBTA? Is the parking going to be kind of a, I know we talk a little bit about residential over here and some different changes. Have we talked a little bit more, or is that still down the road on exactly?
Still down the road.
Public, private,
right.
sharing?
From the planning department, we haven't been engaged on any site work or site talk on that. From my recollection, I do recall there was a period of time in my career where we've looked at that garage, worked with the MBTA, not currently, I'm talking, more than 5 years ago, where they wanted to replace all of the parking that facility once provided. I believe in the most recent RFP that's out there, or was out there, they've moved away from the replacement of commuter parking. And I think that's pretty significant.
Right.
But, we have to think that the market is going to create its own parking demand in there. And, we will engage to figure out, what other additional, general public parking or what other parking from other area businesses, might, that, if they could utilize that space. So that is a down the road conversation.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Rob.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming in tonight. I was under the presumption that we were going to get a $10 million grant from the state to do the General's Bridge. What does that factor into this?
The construction of the bridge is not contemplated in the $60 million. And it wouldn't be a grant. The Mass DOT is paying for the bridge. It's a Mass DOT project. It's not a city project.
Okay.
So they're using their own
So
funding
their
source.
$10 million they're doing is for the bridge. This is for the improvements in the ways, like
Correct.
the
And all the
alignments,
approaches.
the improvements. So really, in a nutshell, you said it's 13.565 is under the number 5 urban renewal, General McConville Way surface public improvements. So they're basically going to come in and they're going to construct, they're going to fund the bridge itself, right?
Correct. So I just moved to this image. It's in the
Yes.
diff package.
Yep.
So this one is shaded. So you can see the breakdown a little bit more clearly of this 13. When we do these complicated projects, I've seen, the best way to do it is to break it down into chunks. So you're seeing the 13. What I see is the subsurface under the McConville Way, that would be the blue strip. And then I also see the surface of that roadway as well. I also see there's a remnant of the old parking way. That would be that orange sort of L shape down to the bottom. And another element to this is the parking way intersection. I think that's been one of the more difficult traffic spots for us folks, is there's not a lot of queue space between Parking Way and Bergen Parkway, and there's a lot of backup there. So this is one of the long-term intersection improvements where we will migrate that intersection further, I guess, east or further towards Hancock Street to align with this realigned McConville Way. So, but that really has to happen as its own little construction project. The other piece on here is the Cliveden Street improvement. So that's just an improvement of that roadway headed up to Hancock Street. And then in that green area, you see where we think, there's an opportunity for some really great placemaking spots with some nice public space.
So the funding of that bridge, the $10 million that the state's going to award, is that going to be upfront, or is that something that has to be reimbursed? Are they going to come in and they're going to?
We don't see any of the dollars.
Okay.
We
They
don't
take
have
care
to
of that.
They take care
They're
of
putting the
all.
investment into Quincy.
Correct.
Why
And
is that so?
So that would be that white area where you would see the bridge, so we
Sure.
don't have that color. That's being taken care of.
And why are they giving us the $10 million?
Why? Because they
Why?
believe in Quincy Center.
So
We-
the
we've had some
investments
really-
that we're making to do this
Yeah.
is why they're coming in and putting some skin into Quincy, Massachusetts, and
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And there's been a lot of that too, by the way. If you want, we've been able to get MassWorks funding for the Town Brook relocation. We had an old federal earmark for the construction of the concourse that we were shovel-ready at the time that ARA funding was offered back in the Obama administration. So we were successful in getting ARA funding for the concourse construction. But then the federal earmark kind of, lifted off of that project, and the city went and was able to grab that former federal earmark and get that reprogrammed for the Hancock-Adams Common transportation improvements. So in each one of those cases, when the state's involved, with the federal funds are involved, the city never really sees the federal dollars. That's usually run down through the state agencies. So Mass DOT built the transportation improvements for the Hancock-Adams Common. Mass DOT built the concourse roadway, and Mass DOT is building the bridge.
you're anticipating the $61 million DIF fund, or you're anticipating this. How would you bond it? Are you gonna bond it as you use the monies? Or how are you gonna put it on a short-term band of it?
That's not my decision.
Okay.
I'm on the more of the contractual and getting the money out the door and working
Okay,
as
I'm
quickly as
just trying to
possible.
figure out, so there's timelines on here. I see some of them have 12 months, some of them have 24 months, some of them 36 months. You're not going to start drawing on that monies until you really are going to start that type of project. So you're going to be, can you kind of walk me through what you think it'll be done first, and how do you?
I believe we will move forward with the property acquisitions because there's a time factor to that.
So the LDA,
No, the property acquisitions for the Cliveden Street extension.
Okay.
And the property acquisition for 100 Parking Way. So those will be, capital expenses I would expect.
That kind
to
of
be
leads me
upfront.
into the LDA with this Fox Rock. Does that have anything that this has, goes hand in hand, doesn't it? No?
Not from my perspective.
Okay. If the LDA was to not pass, will you still do this project?
Yes.
You're still going to do these?
Yep.
No matter what? What
Right,
happens
because,
with that?
again, we're creating the development sites where they didn't exist before. So whether it's the Fox Rock folks or the next folks that come into town, we still need to create these development sites.
You're trying to move forward with this no matter what? This builds basically the foundation improvements of
Yeah,
doing all this other development there.
correct.
So you're going to need this no matter what. Okay. Kind of paints the picture a little bit for the average person out there. I'll yield to the rest of the group. I just wanted to get that out there first and see where we're at. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor DeBona. Counselor Liang.
Very good, thank you.
I'm so glad to see you here because I know that, you have your hands in all things planning, not just in the downtown, but across the whole city, and I really appreciate your expertise. And so I'm excited to have you here tonight. I just have a couple of questions that I don't know that you could answer, but they might end up being follow-up items that we'll have to get and then review and come back and ask on. But the first is, I was hoping to get a full detailed summary of how much DIF we have borrowed to date and total I-cubed funding to date. I think, are we still trying to pursue the $40 million for I-cubed funding, or do we-
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, I think this is something that came up when I first started in Build. We started at the same time, so this was back in 2015. I don't know if you know any more about it, but what's the holdup with, securing that $40 million?
So this is good. So I-cubed is almost, it's very similar in its structure to the city's DIF, where we're pledging new tax growth to cover expenses today. The way the I-cube works is it uses state revenues. So the primary driver on the state revenue is employment taxes. So I-cubed is very much a commercial, you really need the commercial development to get that access that I-cubed, formula. In addition to the income tax, the state also qualifies sales tax. And there is one-time collection of sales tax for, construction dollars as well, but it also anticipates sales tax off of retail products. To date, we've seen a lot of residential development that has come forward, thus far. I think the Fox Rock proposal, that you guys will be hearing about is the first real big commercial, development proposal that's come forward that we believe, could begin to start to make that I-cube formula work. So in there, we are working with the state and have been working with the state. We've been preliminarily approved, I believe, since 2013, and they've, just staying in contact with our state partners, they've extended our preliminary approval, and it's still current today.
Okay, is there a deadline that they've given us to work with, or is that 40 million still a possibility, and they're sort of allowing us to take the time that we need to get to that place where we can apply and then receive
They've given
those
us,
funds?
yeah, plenty of time.
Okay.
And if you really want to dig into I-cubed, Mr. Seymour is actually on the list of one of the peer reviewers for that program for the state. And he plays a role advising the city on, that I-cubed element. There was a push that we did a few years back, and we don't think we would ever, get the entire 40 million at once, but, there's a very good chance, we can get, chunks of it, implementing or increments of that I-cubed. Probably 2 of them, I think we were contemplating at one point.
Okay, yeah, I just don't want to miss out on that opportunity, particularly if it's something that we've already started down the path of exploring and going through the application process for, that, if we wait any longer, again, it's $40 million. I don't want to miss out on.
Right.
having that
So one of the big moves for us and a big signal from the state government is, I-cubed was granted under the Patrick administration, and under the Baker administration, they have extended us. So we have received, very friendly support from the state government from, 2 different administrations.
Okay, so it's just, so again, just going back to what I'm looking for as a summary, with sort of then detailed outlines for each of those line items, total diff to date, what we've spent it on, We did get a MassWorks grant, right? And we have spent that money
We've
as
gotten
well.
multiple MassWorks grants.
Okay. Again, just getting a summary of that and what we spent it on as well. And then in the memorandum from RKG, it said in there that there were other programs that were used to help fund the work in the downtown, but it didn't say what kind of programs. And so again, if we can just get a summary of what those programs were and how much funding came out of those said programs, that would also be helpful.
Sure, and, I had mentioned in my testimony, there is quite a bit of environmental work, environmental remediation. An example of that is, we are in discussions with Mass Development in the potential EPA for brownfields funding, to help with that remediation as well. So it's something we sort of constantly, try to work on and work and keep our eyes open for any funding opportunities.
Yeah, I know, and I'm happy that, we are taking opportunities to use other sources of funding. Again, it's just helpful to see the entire picture of everything that was, allocated and then spent to date, what it was spent on and what sources they're coming from, just to get an understanding of what we're looking at now that's being asked of us. So that would be helpful to get, again, just the summary of all of those line items to date. And then what else is it that I was looking for? Oh, this is something I had asked Craig, and then I think he had pointed to you and said you could provide this as well, is a sum of each individual band, interest-only band, and traditional bonds, and what their interest rates are. If you can provide that breakdown, that would also be helpful.
Good, if we could provide that as follow-up information?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
because that'll come out of municipal finance.
And then Councilor DeWanda touched on this a little bit, but I also had a note on here to try to inquire and get a better understanding of the timeline for the spending that's in front of us. You have the breakdown here for all of these different pieces, right? And so it's all sectioned out: downtown interim parking, you got the urban renewal, all the different slides you went through. And some of them, again, do have timelines here, but the majority of them don't. And this is helpful to, again, understand when these appropriations are, if they are approved, when when it's anticipated that they're going to be spent, just so we know when the next request might be, right? Because I'm just looking back to on the different bond authorizations that have happened in the past, and there was one in 05, or presented in 05 anyways, and then in 07, and then not again until 2016, obviously given the circumstances of the sort of the economy here, and then again in 17, and now again this year. So, it'd be helpful to sort of see a pattern of, how much gets requested, and then how long does it take for that money to be spent down, and what is it getting spent on? Again, I know Councilor DeBona asked the question, you're not really able to pinpoint a timeline and say, well, Councilor, this amount of money will be spent in the next however many months, and then after that, we're going to be asking for this amount of money, which will be spent in this amount of months. But that's helpful, again, just to project and see what it is that we're committing to, because some of the work here is a lot of prep work. It's not final work. Councilor McCarthy asked about the garage. Some of the money that could be approved here will go towards the start of the garage, but won't necessarily be the completion of it. If we don't know those numbers, we're putting money into the start of something, well, then at that point, do we say, no, we're just not going to fund the rest of it? And so it's a tough place, right? Like, obviously, I want to see the revitalization of the downtown and see the positive net effects of that. And I just want to make sure that when we see funding requests like this, and then we see these line items that are not, they're not whole, they're sort of done piecemeal, it's tough because you're committing to something where you don't know what the final amount is going to look like, And again, I'm not trying to say that we should stall everything and just stop and, let the entire downtown tank. I mean, I remember looking at that hole across the street from my business for 3 years. It was awful. It was, I don't ever want to have that happen, But at the same time, the more we're growing in the city and the more ability we have to spend, I just want to make sure that we're being smart about that spending and not, making mistakes where you're sort of playing catch up, right? And so just trying to be more planful and thoughtful about this process where, if you're committing somewhere in this ballpark of this $15 million, just starting the planning of a garage, that we go into it with an understanding of what that number would look like and what that final estimate would look like. Similar to also to, the acquisition of the Messina lot, if we had been a little bit more planful of that's going to be 5 years from now, 8 years from now, some of the monies that we could have appropriated at that time, we know we'd be spending at that point. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So it's like when you get more credit on a credit card, you don't have to keep spending and spending and spending, just because you have the money and the availability to spend the money, and so this is what it feels like a little bit to me sometimes, is that I want to see these improvements, and I love the wide sidewalks, and I love the activity down here, and I want to see more of that. I just want to be careful about how we're doing it and how we're approaching it, and we have the ability to spend. That's a wonderful thing for the city. I'm really proud of that, but this doesn't mean that we should be then spending all of the money that we are able to spend. Does that make sense? So I would love to have this information. It'd be really informative to this process for me personally. If you can get that along, that would be great. And yeah, again, that's sort of my thought process in approaching this, so I appreciate your time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Counselor Liang. Counselor Mahoney.
Just to tack on to what Councilor Liang was saying, when we're going through the $61 million, there's certain things too that don't have anything to do with the LDA, as you said, like the McConville Bridge and the general bridge and those pieces. So if we could highlight those, and I think that's what she's asking as well, is to know like what's the priority for these and when we anticipate them starting. And if we could break out specifically what is tied to the LDA, which we can by looking at that, but it just helps to break it out like specific to the LDA. When I'm looking at it, I have a high expectation of that because it says Ross parking lot. But I think too, just to touch on something that was said earlier, when we were talking about, the Great Recession and the fact that that's what happened to Streetworks, that's not truly what happened to Streetworks. Our experts who are here and have been here since that started, that was because we were gullible and we were believing developers to be able to do something, and we let a hole in the ground go there before we actually stopped it. We're lucky that we don't have that, but that's the reason why we have to ask these questions and make sure that we're positioning ourselves in a positive way. So when we're asking those questions, to make sure that we're being conservative in the way we're going about borrowing this money, and that we're being appropriate about the way we're spending this money and the way we're looking at things, that's what we have to do. When we have overpromises for things where we say we're going to get 1 million square feet of development and we're developing out the whole lot, that's something we have to be concerned with, and how we're approaching it and how we're taking out that money. I do have to say that because, quite honestly, to blame it on the recession, we all saw that coming, but we also let it happen. So I just don't want that to happen again, and that's why we have to be careful. We do pay experts. We have them in the budget. But to blame it on something like that when we were already all involved, we should have been able to highlight that and not let that happen. We would have saved a lot of time, and we would have been much further along in our development had we stopped that before that happened. That's just a fact. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize if, I'm sure you'll point it out if I repeat anyone else's question. I had to take a personal call, so I stepped out. I missed
I'd be happy to.
maybe a couple, yeah. I invite you to stop me from talking.
very kind. Thank you.
All right, Rob, good evening.
Good evening.
So I just want to echo what, one of the things that Councilor McCarthy and Liang had said about knowing what the total amount is. I was thinking about it in terms of like when you buy a dog, like the dog might be free, but the dog costs a lot more money long-term, right? So like so we need to know what the full build-out of the, bless you, of the garage will be. But we also, and I raised this the last time we talked about a garage, when we talked about the Hancock garage, we need to have a really good understanding of what the costs of managing and maintaining the garage will be, right? So that's something I trust you guys are going to follow up with us on it? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So the total project, what's the current total project of the URDP? What's the total cost of the current URDP projects?
The budget that's in the Urban Renewal Amendment 5?
The whole thing, soup to nuts. So historical to future.
That's
It's not like a trick question, like I know the number, I'm just trying to see if you know the number. I'm asking, so like the Town
We've been at it
Brook.
for a long time, so.
Yeah, right. The Town
so-
Brook, the Concourse, the Adams Green, the Hancock lot, sewer lines, so that stuff's already done.
Yeah.
Or, right, so that, I would include that in there, but I'm
Right.
just trying to, because I'm going through some of the old documentation, and the number has steadily gone up, 2015, 116 million, 2015, 116 million, 2016, 134 million, so 141 million. So I'm wondering where we are at in 2019, what's the total project cost for the infrastructure contemplated under the URDP?
Cumulative, like what's accomplished and what we
Yeah.
still have left to do?
Yeah.
That's a moving target. I'd have to get back to you to make a really good estimate. Because my mind floods with so many projects that we've done over the years.
Yeah, no, I know.
yeah.
There's a lot of money that has already been spent.
Sure
A
has,
lot,
yeah.
relocating to Town Brook was the,
Yeah.
I mean, nothing would have happened if we didn't do that. So, yeah, if you could get us that, I'm just curious as to, because URDP spells out all the infrastructure projects that we're going to do, from the sidewalks to the utilities to the road movings.
Right, right.
So that's got to have a price tag.
It does, but, because the city, so the DIF was adopted by the state in 2004. So that's just a few years before we adopted it here locally. We're one of the few communities that utilizes the DIF, and the DIF program had some development elements to it, but we felt that, going the urban renewal route, the urban renewal program, Chapter 121B, had a lot more longer history with trying to organize that. So, the way I approach it is urban renewal has the tools, but the DIF actually really becomes your action budget. I think of almost like our HUD budget, sort of a 5-year plan, but each year you have an action budget. So the urban renewal budget is sort of an overall, view of the activities, but the DIF becomes what we are acting on now to, again, create development sites and, replace the infrastructure in an incremental way. Not everything all at once, because that's impossible to do.
So how would you know what to prioritize if you don't know what each thing costs? I don't know. I was ready to let you off the hook with just that you get me a number, but that last comment you made, I don't know.
Well, we
you-
started with a
no, no, no,
master
no, no,
development
hold on,
agreement.
Hold on, my turn now. So what,
I'm not sure.
you have a number?
Yeah, just the question is, are you looking what the entire URDP spend has been?
And will be, yeah, what the total,
And so what's been spent, obviously, is easier to tie down than what will be spent. But that's what this is, an estimate of what will be spent. But we can get to what was spent. I think that's where I was confused until you just said that.
yeah, I mean, well, there's a total number, and that's future and past. I mean, I'm just looking at, so the BSC group, Quincy Center Urban Revitalization Development Plan, presentation to the City Council, June 6, 2016, has a price tag of total project costs for the URDP plan, $134 million. Redgate in 2016 had a total cost for the URDP contemplated infrastructure projects as $116 million. Right? Those are the ones that I have in front of me, the Redgate and the BSC. And I'm just wondering so that number is obviously always going to go up. It's an inflationary type number. So if I asked you how much is the Ross Garage going to cost last year, it's one number. It's likely more now, just by the nature of inflation and rising construction costs, whatever. So I expect that number to go up, but I like to know that number as a benchmark as to what our vision is and what our vision costs moving forward. So somebody's got the number, I'm sure. The number exists. It's not like you have to go and do a lot of work on it. So I had started to ask Craig the question about the offsetting DIF expenditures with revenue, right? So again, it goes to what's the total cost, right? And we can offset that with other revenue sources rather than simply borrowing DIF monies to pay for it, right?
Correct.
Okay. So in some of these reports that we've been given over the years, there were revenue projections that we would generate $10 million from the sale of the Hancock lot and $12 million from the sale of the Ross Garage parcel.
Correct.
So are we still anticipating $12 million from the sale of the Ross Garage parcel?
As the administration enters into negotiations on the sale of those, that takes different form depending on that deal.
So is that a yes or a no?
That's a.
So we're still planning on
It's a
12 million?
case-by-case basis.
Okay, so we're still planning on 12 million. Good to know. Do we have an appraisal for the Ross Garage area?
That you're starting to get into some of the LDA stuff. That
I'm
I
not,
think
because
we'll
I'm talking
cover.
about revenues to offset the diff.
We do not have a current generic appraisal of the Ross Garage area.
Do we have any other kind of appraisal? other than a
There
generic?
are appraisals out there for some of the work we're contemplating, yes.
No, I'm not talking about the work, I'm talking about the property itself.
The Ross,
You're asking to borrow $61 million. I'm wondering if, can we take $12 million out of that request? Because we're going to get that in revenue when we sell the Ross land?
what makes that difficult is we're not selling the entirety of the Ross parcel. We're selling portions of that parcel.
Okay, so the
We're
portion
also-
the first portion that we're selling, how much money are we going to generate from that sale?
Again, that, I think, would be a conversation.
How do we not
for
know
the
that
land
before we're
disposition.
talking about borrowing $60 million? How do we not know what money's coming in? So we're just going to borrow $61 million, and what are we going to do with the money that then comes in from the sale? Where does that money go? We're borrowing money here, then we're selling city land here, we're getting more money here. I don't understand I don't understand then. It's very confusing to me that we would sell city land, generate revenue coming in, and rather than offsetting what we would borrow to build the infrastructure, we're going to borrow the full amount to build the infrastructure, and then we're also going to keep the money to sell the land. And they're in two different buckets that,
Yes, so the
Can't
question is,
discuss?
who's the overarching thought leader that's putting all these pieces together?
yeah, so I asked Craig said it wasn't him.
Right.
So I said I'd take my shot at you. I'm just wondering,
So I think Mr. Walker wants to say something, but this is you're deferring to Mr. Geary?
We do have a team of appraisers who have been working with us.
Team?
Yes.
all right.
Who have been working with us to appraise the Ross lot. The Ross lot, as you know, the development that's contemplated is for a medical facility, which is ordinarily a nonprofit. Our appraisers, in looking at that property, that type of facility is not one that would be built. As Mr. Seymour said, the market dictates. So the fact of the matter is, one of the reasons that the city has not had commercial development is that the market isn't ready to make those investments in the downtown area. And while we no longer need to incentivize the construction of residential housing, stick over podium, 4 or 5 stories, is because the market is there, the market's demanding it. And as I've said from this podium, over the course of the last 2 years, we've been diligently working to bring commercial activity into the Ross lot. And,
You've done a good job bringing it in.
well, thank you thus far. And obviously, the infrastructure supports a facilitator for those commercial entities that would be willing to locate
And
there.
it's always been the plan, even under Streetworks. It was, you build the infrastructure,
That
you
is-
draw in the investment. That's
that is-
always the plan, that's basic.
That is absolutely correct. So, and we will be explaining this to the council when we appear before you in another week or so.
Okay.
All
All right, fair enough. I won't hold you to it. I mean,
Go
hey,
through
listen,
that.
if
But-
we're not getting the $12 million for the Ross Garage and we're getting 1 million square feet of medical office space instead, like was promised, then I'm okay with that. So I have some other questions for Rob then. I mean, that's a trade-off, $12 million for the Ross Garage for 1 million square feet of medical. So Rob, the expenditures out of the diff, right? We just have the design cost, what is it, $3 million for the Ross Garage, right?
Correct, 60.
60? Oh, 6E.
6D.
Oh, okay, I thought you were saying
E's in dog,
60.
sorry.
I was
Nope.
waiting for the rest of the sentence. Okay, yeah. So that would be the full design costs, as we can expect at this point, I mean, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Where are we building that? Or strike that, because maybe that goes into somebody else's wheelhouse, but we don't know where we're building it, right?
We have a pretty good idea of where that's going at this point.
Right. The cost drivers would be where you're building it, wouldn't they?
Correct.
And are we
So
still contemplating that it might be 2 garages instead of 1 garage?
at this point, it's 1 garage,
Okay.
but, you know, if it ends up being 2,
Is that reflected in the URDP 5?
yes,
That it's 1 garage?
yes.
Okay, all right. I haven't gotten that far in all the
Yep.
material yet, so, okay. All right, so you think that that's a fair and accurate, what am I looking at here? Where
Yeah.
is that?
So, you know, by the general bridge, you see that long rectangle coming from the bottom of the screen. That's
That's the
that,
General's Bridge?
that's yeah, so
Okay.
that's sort of the General's Bridge and Hannon Parkway. We feel going the long way along the General's Bridge, that long rectangle, is the footprint we're currently carrying. Now, part of the analysis here is we have contemplated whether, because we are asking for the acquisition of 100 Parking Way, whether that garage could be L-shaped as well, if we needed additional spaces.
Yeah, why would we buy 100 parking way? That's not fully on 100 parking way, right?
No, that's on a half of 100 Parking Way.
Right. Which we've already taken.
We have not taken. We've identified since
What did
2007.
we take for the bridge? Didn't we take some portion of their land already?
We took a portion of the private parking lot next to what we have called the Commonwealth Building. I think it's
Yep.
37R. We've
Okay.
taken a portion of that.
And that was owned by Fox Rock.
That was owned by Foxrock,
That's
correct?
the one that they claim is worth $1 million, right? Okay.
I'm not
Skip
sure
it.
on that.
So this parking garage is on a portion of land we already took
Correct?
and a portion of 100 parking way?
Former parking way,
Yeah.
and then 100 parking way, correct?
Right.
So that's the current concept that
How
we
much
have in-
of a percentage, just rough estimate, is on 100 parking way?
I mean, I think that image shows about close to 50% of the lot in this location, but we want to reserve the area that would jut out towards the Hannon Parkway as a possible expansion of the footprint of that garage.
Sure. Why not build it on the Messina lot?
Good question. We think there's a lot.
And the reason why I ask that is because we've taken the Messina lot.
Yeah.
We haven't taken 100 parking way. So why wouldn't we build the thing we need to build on land we already control rather than spending $9 million to take more land and then to give city land to the developer who we just took that $9 million worth
Right.
of land to, right?
Two thoughts on that question. First thought is, would like to sell that and collect tax revenue on that parcel. That is a high value at the four corners of the Hannon Parkway and Concourse Roadway. So you could get a higher value off of that if that was a taxable property. The second point is, one of the main
Do you have an
reasons.
appraiser? Do you have appraisals that back that up? Or is that just
I
what we're thinking?
believe you'll have a chance to
Okay.
ask that question at a future meeting where the
Will I have a
appraiser
chance
may
to
be
get,
there.
the better question is, will I have a chance to get an answer at a future meeting to that question?
Right.
Okay.
So the second portion is a part of the underlying reasoning for the new General's Bridge is to, when we did the Hannon Parkway, that was always viewed as a roadway to get folks, through downtown without clogging the local roads in downtown.
Unless you're coming from West Quincy and you want to take a left on Hancock, which isn't allowed, but yep.
Right. That Hannon Parkway allowed us to do the transportation improvements we did out front here to create the Hancock Adams Common. But what the bridge does, the General's Bridge, is allows folks to bypass Hannon Parkway and take a right turn onto that General's Bridge and access a garage off of that bridge. So back down where you see it connect with the
That's where it
McConville Way
penetrates the Hancock
is
lot,
where
too,
we're
right.
planning the traffic circulation to load that garage.
Right. And that's going to be a straight shot, General's Bridge, straight past that public parking area, straight through General Dunford Drive,
Yep.
straight into the Hancock public parking lot.
Over Hancock Street and into the Hancock lot, correct.
All right, and what, over Hancock Street, it's going to be a flyover or a fly under?
Hancock Street will be a stop sign.
So what does that do for people? If you have to stop, I mean, how does that, that's just the way it works? We're calling that the penetration, you have to, okay. Okay, all right, whatever. So that's the reason why we're not building it on land we already possess, where we're contemplating taking
Correct.
100 Parking Way. All right. I did not see an appraisal for 100 Parking Way in the packet.
I believe that will be, once the funding or if the funding's approved, the taking request will be a separate filing in front of this body.
Right. So
with the
you
appraisal
won't
work.
tell us how much it's worth until we agree to pay $9.25 million for it? That's what it is.
He, through you, Mr. Chairman, no. We will provide the appraisals for that. The takings parcels will, the technical orders will be submitted to the council within the next couple of meetings or so. But absolutely, this is like any other acquisition that we've done before. Of course, you'll be provided the appraisals and the documentation relative to anything that we try to attempt to purchase.
So we'll get those appraisals before we're expected or before
course.
we would vote on this diff,
Of course.
right? Okay. Why weren't they included in the original packet? Just, okay. So you guys have them, though, and we'll get them.
I did not generate that number. I simply plugged it into the spreadsheet. It was provided to me by the administration.
Okay.
Mr. Walker?
We'll have someone to answer that question specifically for you at the appropriate time. We'll get an answer to you. My gut is that at least part of the reason is there's a building there that implicates a greater value. That's at least a piece of it. I'm sure there are other factors involved.
Now wouldn't be the appropriate time? Hi, Bill.
Good to see you again, Counselor. Good questions. The 100 Parking Way will be a negotiated sale. It won't be an adverse taking by the city from a private entity as the Messina was.
Just to recap what we've seen in the last 3 minutes, Rob gave us some information. Mr. Walker corrected that, told us that, and then you're correcting what Mr. Walker said, that it wouldn't be a taking. Didn't you say it'll be a taking?
No, it's an
and we'll get to the
acquisition.
appraising?
Technically, it's still be a taking, even if it's an agreed-upon sale, Mr. Chairman. Even if the price is agreed upon, it's still, quote-unquote, the process you go through is a taking. So there's no,
Why wouldn't it be a
there's
sale?
no daylight.
Why wouldn't it be a sale? Why does it have to be a taking? Why can't we just buy it?
I'll defer to the parliamentarian for the administration. I have referred to it as an acquisition because the parties have negotiated a transaction for the city to acquire it. And
And you're the lawyer.
yes,
We don't need to take a property. The city can buy a property just like a private
that's
party
what,
can. Right.
that's what I'm saying.
Right, okay.
And so.
So are we buying this or are we taking this?
No, we're
100
buying-
Parking
we're-
Way?
We're buying it.
Okay.
And
So there won't be an order for a taking?
We,
There is a difference, hold on a second here, right? There is a difference between a taking, whether it's friendly or not, and a purchase. They're two very different things.
yes. And I'm,
And I'm wondering whether or not, in the thing I'm being asked to vote on, and we're having a hearing on tonight, I'm asking whether or not that parcel is a taking or an acquisition.
I'm going to characterize it as an acquisition because we have negotiated with the owner.
Okay.
And we do have, let me say, it's not a written agreement yet, but an agreement in principle.
Right.
As to how we will take, I say take
Obtain,
it,
obtain,
but how we acquire it.
Okay.
And likewise, that party also happens to be the party that owns the parcels on Hancock Street that will be acquired for the purpose of extending the street down to the parking lot. There's no street there now, as you know. It's an extension of Cliveden Street and will be called General Dunford Way, or that may be called something else. But it's always our preferred approach to acquire property.
What is 100 Parking Way? I'm super confused now. So
It's-
that's
it's
not,
It's the old A.J. Wright building.
oh, okay, all right, I'm sorry,
It's the old
I was
A.J. Wright,
confused.
and it's Gentle Dental.
Okay.
And the owner.
So it's the LBC I thought we were talking about the Commonwealth building.
Oh,
That
no,
was
but-
the Fox Rock.
No, we're not acquiring that.
Okay.
We're not acquiring
It doesn't
it.
change any of my questions, but it
Yeah.
changes my understanding.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
We made it clear to Foxrock that we were not going to acquire it, as a matter of fact. They acquired it for the purpose of their development. We did acquire, as you commented on, a small portion of the parking lot adjacent to
Right.
the Revel.
Well, that's why
parking.
when I was asking Rob that it didn't make sense to me that we were going to take, I was thinking that was 100 parking way, the
No,
Commonwealth
no,
building.
no.
Why would we take it from them and then give them the land to, it didn't make sense to me.
Oh, oh,
So that
okay.
answers that.
Okay.
Full acquisition parcel in L, so it's the entirety of 100 Park. I'm just trying to understand where parking way here
Well, I
hits.
believe in this rendering, the rendering doesn't reflect the current conditions because it shows the relocated parking way. Is that not correct?
Because then the future development parcel would also be part of 100 parking way,
That is.
which
that-
is retaining private ownership, or that will also be part of the city?
It would be available for purchase from the city for urban development purposes.
Well, we'll just find
In-
someone to give it
in
to.
the In the interim, it would be utilized for interim parking, because as I mentioned from the podium here, in support of the Messina taking, which was a taking, that looking at the chessboard, looking at the area that we're trying to redevelop, we're going to need both interim parking as well as areas for the construction, the laydown areas for the construction of not only the public improvements that have been mentioned, but also for the development of the garage, the construction of the garage in the future, as well as for the private developments.
Interesting.
You good, Mr. Chair? Can I go?
Yeah, please,
Can I get
sorry.
back into it?
Yeah, yeah,
No, it's
jump
okay.
back
I
in.
just want to make sure
And
you
incidentally,
follow the thought through.
the,
Not even ask a question, just offering information. I love it, Bill. Give it to
okay.
me. What do you got?
then-
Lay it on me.
Okay, I'm fine.
No, it's okay. You can. I wasn't mocking you. But okay. We good? I'm happy to take the information.
Okay, no, we're good.
Okay. So you said something that raised another question that I had in my notes here. Do we know what the parking lot, what the Ross garage, new Ross garage parking is going to be? It's still 1,000 spaces, right?
Ross?
Whatever we build over there on the Ross.
Yes, that's part of
Area.
the purpose for the design study.
Right. But we're still contemplating 1,000 spaces, right? That's still the general thought process?
In that range, yes.
Okay, all right. And are we going to use, to build the garage, are we going to use DIF money?
Well, as Mr. Stevens testified to, we have applied for an iCube funding for that
Hoping the-
purpose.
Hoping the state will build it,
And,
essentially, right?
and
Yeah.
hoping that the state, we've been renewed
Yeah.
on that request. We are actively working with the Commonwealth now. We're keeping them apprised of the new developments here in the Ross area. When we spoke to them 2 years ago, essentially, they said, come on back when you've got a
You got
project.
something, yeah.
And now we have a project that we can go back to them with, that they have confidence is going to, that this garage is number one, necessary, and number two, would be integral to the success of the project.
So fair to characterize our planning for the garage at this point to be cautiously optimistic that the state, some other revenue other than DIF or general obligation bonds
Yes.
will cover that? Okay.
Yes.
All right. And is that one of the reasons why it's not included in this
Correct.
DIF request now?
Correct.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
Well, there is money for the design, is.
Right, which we would have to cover regardless of the, yep. Okay, that makes sense. The parking. So there's $1 million in this bond for temporary parking.
Yes.
That temporary parking is for the exclusive use of Fox Rock?
No, I believe it covers the various areas that we've been managing. Is that what you're referring to?
I don't know. I'm asking you what you're referring to. What's the $1 million cover for the temporary parking?
The lease lots valet in the first section?
No, yeah, but it's not the valet one. There's a separate line item for just temporary parking.
Counselor, I'd point you back to this image back up
6.
here. So the pink areas, right now, a large portion of that is the Messina lot. Once the McConville Way,
So just to clarify, we're talking about 6C, which is just temporary parking, Ross Improvements, temporary parking, $1 million.
Correct.
All right, so go on.
so the pink area, we're looking at construction needed to expand the Messina lot.
This is the city of Quincy depicted in this map here?
This is the city of Quincy. So the pink area is to the right of the pink area, as you're looking at the screen, is the Hannon Parkway.
Gotcha.
The top of the pink is Hancock Street. The bottom of the pink is, you see a little red
Same
band.
overlay of what we were just looking at.
Exactly. So provided the city moves forward with the 100 parking way acquisition, we envision some expansion of interim parking in this area, as well as to the north, sort of what you see from Messina now, where the Ross Way currently exists. So we look to expand the Ross Way area in that spot.
So what's the $1 million for temporary parking?
I'd have to get back into some of the budget estimates in here.
No, I mean,
Get back to
what
you.
is it? What is it? What's the temporary parking? Who's it for?
The interim parking?
Yeah.
Where it hasn't been determined. We're anticipating, once the Ross surface lots you see now get impacted with construction on the north end, plus the bridge, that there'll be a need for interim parking. So we added that to this budget.
Okay. And so how many spaces is that?
Again, it's all to be determined. It's all anticipation of moving out of the Hancock lot in the same scenario where we, over time, shrunk what was available in the Hancock lot. We're anticipating that same phenomenon to occur in the Ross area. So that is the source of, I think, just that budget line item in that category.
And so what you're saying, the $1 million is to make the purple a temporary parking area?
That's what we know of right now, and we anticipate more.
But most
More
of that is
areas.
a temporary parking area, correct?
Right, it already is a temporary, I mean, it's, at least 50% of it's already a temporary parking area, and the other half is an area that you're designated for future development, that one little block in between the blue and the red, right? That's LBC's A.J. Wright building, right?
Correct.
So just from a 50,000-foot view of this, right? Like, so I still want to understand what the $1 million gets us, but what we're talking about here is one of our development partners, of which we only have 3 downtown, 4 if you count Cliveden, but I don't think they're a development partner because they didn't build on any city lands. So 3 development partners. And we're contemplating taking one of our development partners' lots, parcels, their land, build a garage on half of it, and then sell the other half to another developer in the future.
I mentioned earlier, we could use the entirety of that 100 parking way for a footprint of a new garage. Again, we don't know. In this area, we checked back with Desmond and BSC Group, sort of through the urban renewal, and came up with a footprint, which is the long rectangle that, we saw in the earlier image. But again, based off of what we need to
Sure,
produce for parking spaces.
It could change, I
Yeah.
mean, sure. But I'm just going off of the plans that you've put before me to consider. Based on the plans that you put before me to consider, we are going to take land that belongs to one of our development partners, tear their building down, build a parking garage on half of it, and then sell the other half to another developer, some future developer in the future.
As with the Messina situation,
Messina was not a development partner.
no.
Right. Sorry, I'll let you finish.
The reason that we are having a negotiated acquisition for 100 Parking Way is that they are willing to sell it to us. It's a willing buyer, we're a willing seller because we need it for the duration for parking purposes. In the first instance, that may be interim parking. Indeed, it will be interim parking. And that other remainder portion of the lot will be used for that purpose, for interim parking, and may ultimately be incorporated within the footprint of a new garage. So
That's a lot up in the air for us to contemplate paying for things when it could change, it could be this, it could be that. And I think there's a difference between need and want. Because we could build the garage on the Messina lot, and then we wouldn't need the parking way.
We don't think
but we
that's the
want-
highest and best use for that lot. That was the whole issue. The highest and best use for that lot, we believe, will ultimately be a commercial property. And if we develop the commercial property that will be before you in the LDA, the Messina lot will be that far more valuable because of its strategic location.
Sure, I don't disagree with that, but you get back to what the fundamental driver of my question is, or my point, I guess, is that the difference with Messina is, and you know I've said this up and down Hancock Street, either get on board or get out of the way, right? Take the properties of the people who have vacant buildings, like, let's go already.
Yep.
LBC has not shown themselves to be the type of people who are sitting on their hands. I mean, they're one of our development partners. I wouldn't necessarily support taking land from Fox Rock or from the Galvin companies or from O'Connell
remember
or
the
Quincy
fine
Mutual,
point
because
that-
they're all people who are, they're on board, they see our vision too.
Well, remember the fine point that you made just a short while ago. We are not taking it. We are acquiring it through a friendly transaction. We must consider that they are informed business people who know the value of their property, and indeed, we did appraise that property.
Okay.
And the valuation was high because they had made improvements to the property. They had tenants. Also, as part of our discussions with them, they will relocate their tenants. And that has a value to the city because it spares the city the cost of relocation, which we all know is very expensive. It also, by having a friendly transaction, we forego the expense of litigation. So there's a number of benefits for both parties to engage.
Okay, yeah, if they're in agreement to sell it, then that, you know, that's what they think is the highest and best use for their land, that's entirely up to them. So I'm not in those negotiations, I'll rely upon your involvement in them and your representations about them. But, I mean, we agree in the fundamental principle that if a development partner, regardless of who it is, even if it's not a development partner, if it's, say, I mean, I use Quincy Mutual and the Galvin companies because they're not technically development partners because they weren't building on city land, but they're partners for all intents and purposes and are executing our vision downtown. We're not taking land from those people. I mean, we wouldn't contemplate a taking.
No, and LBC, to their credit, has made an investment in the city. They have bought, last time I saw her, it was about $28 million worth of property. So they put their, money where their mouth was. And so we have been working with them cooperatively on both sides of Hancock Street so that we can move forward with what we need to move forward with by way of encouraging the development that we're proposing in Ross, and also managing the need for ongoing parking during that process. And the comment that Mr. Stevens made about the fact that one of the unanticipated demands that came upon the city as it related to interim parking was the decision by Stop and Shop to relocate large numbers of people from Pennsylvania back to Quincy. And they...
It's not that surprising if you've ever been to Pennsylvania, but...
I'm sorry?
Yeah, go ahead.
And they stated that they made that decision, or the new management of the company that now owns Stop and Shop made that decision predicated on what the administration, what this council, what this city has been doing to revitalize its downtown.
Okay. All right, no, I get that. I consider it, that there's two pools of developers. There's the doers and the wanna-doers. The Galvins, O'Connell, Quincy Mutual, and LBC are the doers. And the only person who we're currently dealing with that's a wanna-doer is Fox Rock, because they haven't done anything.
Well, they're not the only ones we're dealing with, but we are dealing with them, obviously.
yeah.
For the past 2 years, we've been negotiating with them.
Well, I mean, they did do the restaurant
But-
beer
but-
garden over at the temple, but.
We do continue to work with LBC.
Okay, all right. And so we don't know what the $1 million gets us for parking spaces. We don't know where the $1 million of worth of parking spaces are going to be, and we don't know who the $1 million worth of parking
And I'd
spaces
have
are going
to
to serve.
speak with Mr.
right?
Casani about this, because he's the one supervising this component of the project, but it certainly will include the interim parking that I just mentioned in an expanded Messina lot, merged with the 100 Parking Way, whatever remainder lot is there, and what remains of the existing Ross lot.
And I trust when we get into the LDA, we'll get into that too, because you and I have been talking offline about
Yes.
the parking language in the LDA, so I suspect we'll get back to this. My other questions, and wrapping up, my other questions were about some of the other line items, right? And I'm sorry, I didn't write down the numbers, I don't have them in front of me, but there's the city personnel of $350,000, clerk of the works for $360,000. Those are two separate, what's the city personnel?
City personnel is the construction manager out of the mayor's office, Frank.
Okay. So we're putting that back on the diff? Hasn't that been off the diff?
No,
What are the current salaries on the diff?
Frank.
Just Frank?
Yep.
Used to be,
And I believe you made some type of motion to prevent any new funding off the bond proceeds.
right.
Right.
So this would be,
Continuing, Frank.
okay. And then the clerk of the works?
We have a number of public improvement projects now underway. So that clerk of the works currently is the crucial group to oversee all of the implementing public improvements.
Okay.
So we want to continue that role. We think it's been very beneficial.
So we have a construction manager and a clerk of the works?
Correct.
Okay, and so what are their separate job requirements in terms of the downtown?
So construction manager, we use someone from Woodard and Curran, Mr. Russo, who walks around the downtown, does community or
No, I thought it was-
business
I thought-
relations.
Hold on a
That's the
second, so that's a
construction.
third person?
Sorry. City personnel, no, construction manager?
You said the
Where's the
city
third
personnel
person?
was, construction manager was Frank.
Well, that was engineering.
Let's take a giant step back. You tell me, everybody who's covered under this diff request, who's a human being, who oversees things going on downtown?
Frank Tremontosi. And the clerk of the works is
And
the
Tom
company
Russo,
we hired
right?
as the Crucial Group. And construction oversight built into the projects
If you move
that-
your hands slower, I could follow where the ball goes underneath the shells.
Construction management is Woodard and Curran. Sorry, just
So
some of
where
these-
is that?
some-
What
some-
line
some of
number are
these
you
roles.
talking about? You're talking about line what? Are you talking about 8A?
I'm not sure. What line item are you talking about?
I was talking about city personnel, $350,000,
Yep, that is 9A. That is
9A. So that was the one I originally asked you
in the
about.
mayor's office.
So that's Frank.
Correct.
Okay. Then there's a clerk of the works, $360,000.
6G, tied to the development of the second garage. That is, well, we're not sure who that would be, but currently, we have a clerk of the works firm, the Crucial Group, working for us in the Hancock lot.
Well, here does a wonderful
Overseeing the
job.
Hancock lot garage construction, overseeing the roadway construction, all the implementing public improvements, overseeing the Town Brook relocation, working with, because in those agreements, we've designated the private entity, whether that would be the Nova Residence Development Team or the Chestnut Place Development Team to construct those public improvements. So that clerk of the works is working and managing all of those at the contractor level. In the past, and we currently do now, We've also hired out of Woodard and Curran more of a community relations and boots on the ground reviewing detours, communicating on sort of the
I'm going to get to
day-to-day
8F in a
items.
minute. I still, so.
Oh, yeah, you
So
want to
you,
get to 8F.
oh, yeah, I can't wait to get into 8F. So you're moving into, you're moving into 8B, right? When you're
Correct.
talking about Wooden and Curran?
Correct.
That's 8B? Is that also 8A?
8A is the design, is the CAD work, is the engineering work.
Who
on-
does that?
On the next round of implementing public improvements. That's various.
Okay, so that's spread around, that $1 million? All right, and so 8B, the 600,000, that's Wooden and Curran?
Correct.
Okay. And you said that includes the community relations?
For the construction impacts.
Okay, what does that mean?
The work boots on the ground.
No, what you just said, what does that mean?
For the
As in, I
construction
said, so that's,
projects.
I said, so that's community relations, and you said as it relates to construction.
Correct.
So who is relating to who?
The person who is.
Yeah, like,
the
who are they
parties here?
talking to?
Who
is-
did we hire to talk to?
They're hiring, they're talking to area businesses that are impacted by some of the construction activities. Whether they're detours, they're in direct communication with all facets of the project team, whether it's the mayor's office, planning department. Before this meeting, started, that person was here, checking in, following up, connecting down to engineering in the Department of Public Works.
Is that the Regan Communications contract that we previously had? No. So who does that work? What firm does that work?
That work is out of the mayor's office, so I think Chris was.
So Chris does that work? And we pay him six?
So Chris,
part of
the mayor's
600?
office manages that line item.
So you don't know who it is, the person who was here earlier today?
The person that was here earlier was Tom Russo from Woodard and Curran.
Okay, so Tom Russo is the person that does the community relations?
A portion of it.
Okay, and he community relates to business owners?
I believe you get an email each week with construction activities for the upcoming week. That's generated by Tom Russo.
Okay. And that's 8B. All right, and so now jumping down to 8F, the public and government relations.
Correct.
Explain to me why we need to pay $500,000 to have someone handle government relations when we're
The government.
government.
Mr. Walker?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, a large portion of that, and this is over the course of several years, this is not a single year. We do have a government relations planning
2 years, right?
firm.
Not several
I-
years,
I don't
2?
have it in front of me. I don't know if it's 3 or 2, if what we build on it right now. But we do have a planning firm that works with the city to work with the federal government and those agencies to secure funding. And it's because of that work that we were able to get the $4.2 million for the busway grant. The federal government, as you well know, is a pretty difficult labyrinth to navigate through, whether it be Tiger grants, whether it be the Federal Department of Transportation. And we do have someone as part of the team that works, that works with us to obtain that money, and they did obtain, helped us attain that busway grant.
What's the firm?
That would be the Delahunt Group.
So the administration had told us that that contract, we're not currently funding that contract.
We are
right?
not, no.
So that's a future contract. What federal funds are we targeting, and for what specific purposes in this plan?
Perhaps Rob can elaborate on that a little bit, but
Right, well, we obviously monitor Washington DC, and, there is chatter.
Like we all do, or like in a
Behind the
special
scenes on the development of an infrastructure bond bill.
Okay.
And we want to be in position to target, through our local delegation, projects for Quincy through that bill.
So are our 2 senators and our congressmen incapable of monitoring whether or not a federal transportation infrastructure bill goes through Congress?
All the help we can get, will increase our chances.
So we're confident that a $500,000 expenditure over 2 years will increase our chances to get that
Well,
federal?
there's a portion of that for the government relations.
Okay, so what's the other portion?
The other portion is public relation firms for downtown.
Okay.
Public
it's-
relations firms.
Okay, so we don't have
Currently-
anyone doing that now, right?
Yes, we do.
We do? We have someone who talks to the public?
We have Reagan Communications supporting the city, as well as Mavro Creative.
Okay, and so what is Reagan Communications doing? What's their
That's-
work?
Out of the mayor's office.
It must be crowded in the mayor's office these days. I didn't realize you had so many bodies over there. What is the Reagan Communications firm doing?
Regan, most recently, has been working with the city relative to the mitigation for some of the business owners, the restaurant owners in the immediate downtown relative to the parking disruption with the loss of the Hancock lot. What we did was we came up with a program to utilize social media platforms and some other platforms to expand the reach of those restaurants that they would normally have. And that was a service the city provided, sort of as mitigation for the loss of the Hancock lot. That was part of it. The other part of it is, frankly, that Regan is very good at assisting the city with exposure in media that we're not typically accustomed to pursuing. Boston outlets beyond the local, the Quincy Sun, the Quincy Patriot Ledger, or QATV.
Who we love.
Those areas that we wouldn't normally be equipped to generally get placement in. So really, the work that they've done in the last year or two has been focused on those two things, most prominently being really the increase in the amount of marketing that we've done, the city's done, on behalf of the restaurants that are in the immediate core of downtown as we go through the construction of the Hancock lot garage.
Can I just point out the irony of that? So the restaurants are in trouble because there's nowhere to park. So our solution is, well, let's market them so more people come to the restaurant.
No, through you,
With less
Mr.
places to park,
Through you,
right?
Mr. Chairman,
Little
it's more, it's more about arguing and framing and fighting against the perception that there is no parking downtown.
There is
We
nowhere to
know
park.
That is 100% not true.
It's on
After 5
the other
o'clock,
night, I
there is-
called Leo and said, I can't come to your restaurant. There's nowhere to park downtown.
600 spaces in and around the downtown area within immediate walking distance of all those restaurants, and that's the very message that we've been trying to relay to folks over the course of the last, since construction started. Some of these, helping these restaurants relay that message that Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, we have the courthouse lot. We have the Quincy Mutual lot, open and free to the public. We have the Ross lot, which frankly is not something that people were generally accustomed to using in the past. They were not accustomed to walking through that area to get to the core of the downtown. We thought that it was entirely appropriate for the city to make an investment.
Garage
an
area you're
investment.
referring to, they weren't accustomed to walking?
Correct.
The Ross Garage, okay.
Correct, because nobody was using the Ross Garage. But what we did was create a well-lit, easily accessible surface lot that replaced that condemned garage, and people were, and by the way, we needed to get them to start using that more than they would have in the past. We needed to get them to start parking over there at night, on the weekends, and we're creating the educational process to get people to walk through that area, which was, new lights were put in, a mural was put up, new access points
Pardon the
were
interruption,
created.
but this is a tough one for me. I'm feeling my heart race. Through what other channels do these PR and communications people communicate that I've been missing aside from the city of Quincy?
Me too. I'm a city
Twitter
councilor, I
or-
can't find a place to park either.
No, I don't have a problem with the parking. I'll find a spot if I want to go to a restaurant. And I think other people will do that too.
I'll have to follow you around.
But this is about a certain line item in here that I'm having a difficult time understanding the value of. Because if you're talking about getting exposure in the city of Boston through different news channels or whatever, I mean, I don't know where that's happening or what that's happening about, but maybe there's a better way for you to communicate just through work that they've done. If you could put together maybe a press packet of work that this communication firm has done for the city, that would allow us to understand the value of this line item going forward.
Yeah, we can do that.
I would appreciate that. Thank you very much.
I still have a couple of follow-up questions, but just like you had an interjection, I'll yield to Councilor Mahoney if that's okay for a
Sure.
follow up on this topic, and then I'll wrap up.
I didn't realize, I thought when you hired like communication companies and the Delahunt, and what was the Delahunt's name? Delahunt, what is the name? Group. Delahunt Group and the Marvamati's design, do they not have to go out for bid, or is that something you, what's that? They did, they went out for bid? So,
Just did, yep.
so it's a continuation that we're adding into a and all three of them, they went out for bid? Okay. And could we also then see potentially who else was in the bidding process for that? I mean, they were awarded, they're being awarded something with the contingency that we're going to approve it, correct?
No, they're currently this is a continuation of work that they're already doing.
The Delahunt
But you
Group
just
is-
said Delahunt is no longer being paid by the city.
Okay, I thought you were referring to the
I'm referring to all three of them.
public relations firms.
No, you just said, so we're
Okay,
basically
Delahunt-
talking about all three, aren't we? Delahunt, we're talking about public
Delahunt, the
government
Delahunt
relations.
Group is government relations. The two others are public relations. I know there was an RFP that went out relative to the public relations. The government relations, I believe, falls within the category of something that does not require, but I can check on this, would not require under 30B any sort of RFP or that, because it gets into the legal, it gets into a couple other things that would not
What was it?
require
I'm
that.
sorry, that's the Delahunt?
Delahunt, that would be the strategic government planning.
And I remember when I first got on the city council, I asked, and I never got this, a list of what they actually, some of these things did, because we also have, do we still have, we have Discover Quincy and Kerry Byrne as well. Is Kerry Byrne there still?
Yep.
But, okay, and Kerry Byrne specifically for the downtown, or is he
Yes.
citywide? So that's another communication
Mm-hmm.
piece. So can we get an update on all of that? Because that's, that's another piece of that. I'm not saying by any means that we don't need that, but we might have just an overabundance, and it seems to be an overabundance of very highly connected people. Sorry, Chris, but that's what they are.
Thank you,
Went out for bid.
Thank you, Councilor Mahoney.
Okay, Madam Auditor. Yes. We can, just procedurally, the city council can, similar to the budget, we can't add to a bond request, but we can cut an amount,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
So if we wanted to cut $500,000, we would make a motion, we would move forward on that, and that's how we would eliminate something, right?
You would be able to cut, yes.
Right, but it would be the bottom line, and the mayor could choose to spend it however he wanted, and say, take $500,000 out of,
Unless the order were more
Unless you were
specific,
specific, unless the order was
which
specific.
this isn't specific.
oh, cool. Yeah, good, good. Okay, all right. Table that for now. We're going to have more hearings on the diff, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This isn't the one
This is
shot?
not.
Okay, all right, so we'll
We
table that
don't,
for
we
now.
have a long list of follow-up items here.
Okay, all right. And so just to end my time here, Rob, the line item 6F, I think? Yeah, soils, environmental pre-characterization. Right, and you had talked about there was like auto bodies or whatever and some oil there. So the pre-characterization is $500,000. Tell me what we get in a pre-characterization?
So that's anticipated, we're going to be removing a building and removing roadway, and that we would need to analyze that soil underneath.
Okay, so that's not covering any contamination that's on the Ross lot or
There's
adjacent
a
to
portion
it?
of the contamination that we know of as a result of taking the garage down. That is covered up in Category 3A. That $3 million, we're pretty confident that's the urban fill dollar to remove the soil.
Okay.
What's coming down here in Category 6, because now we're at that 100 parking way area, is that's the testing that we're going to need to do once, the city obtains possession.
Got it.
The building's removed and the roadway comes up.
All right, and that $3 million is going to take care of the bloom that's coming from the building, or bloom or plume, whatever they call it, I don't know, that's coming from the building on Hancock Street? Because that's where the contamination came from, right?
There's a few source points in there on those
But I mean, there's one
buildings
that's
along
ongoing.
Hancock Street. Yes.
Right, there's one that's
one's
ongoing. Is that
Correct.
that $3 million cover the one that's ongoing?
Correct.
Okay. And we think,
But it doesn't cover the source building, just.
Say that
out-
again?
It doesn't cover under the building, where that source
because we
originated.
won't get at that.
That's an urban renewal question.
Yeah, okay. Well, you're the urban renewal guy, right? Oh, because we're adding that to the taking. So we might have to pay for that later.
Down the road.
After we, yeah.
But, there's a benefit for the city doing that. because that responsibility is passed on to those prior owners that cost that. So
Right.
there's an attempt to try to recoup some of those expenses.
Right. You may not be able to answer this question, maybe you can't either, Bill, but is that one, and I don't know which property it is or who the owner is or anything, but is that one property a higher priority target for a taking because we're doing this soil remediation work? And if we're going to do it, we might as well do it all together at once? Or is that just kind of, we'll deal with it when we get to it kind of thing, or?
Yeah, we're introducing that concept in the urban renewal, and, the thought would be to allow opportunities for those owners to come forward.
Got it.
And then we'll take it from there.
Okay, and as when the mayor presented this, I said that was my favorite part of it is, you get on board or get out of the way. If you're not going to do something with your property, it's not going to be an eyesore that drags down the rest of the downtown. There's way too much public investment, money, time, into moving this thing forward. And we can't have these blighted properties boarded up and, vacant, whatever. Okay, that's it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Counselor. Okay, so we're going to wrap up unless, Counselor McCarthy.
Some of the comments were repeated a few times over there. You talked about a running list.
Yes.
Can we make sure we all get that running list of
It'll be
issues
in, that'll
before?
be in the minutes.
Yeah, just before it happens. And clarification on the Ross lot on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights, it's empty. I don't know where you're looking for parking, but you can drive right in.
If you're coming from West Quincy, maybe if you're coming from Howes Neck, you can get in, but if you're coming from West Quincy, you can't access it.
Yeah, but that's what Mr. Walker was talking about, the signage that was up. It's just a habit. Everybody still goes to the courthouse and tries to take a left today. Even I do. And you leave Hancock and say it's not there anymore. You go to the Ross lot, on any of those weeknights, it's completely empty. Maybe 5% at night. And you got people buzzing around Albers, and all you got to do is park in the Ross lot and walk through the alley that is well lit, and some of the things that Mr. Walker was talking about, try to market to direct people there, but it's not utilized because no, but I agree, if you go to the Hancock lot and you can't take that left and you keep going straight, you can't go around the church anymore and come back. So now you give up. But
Just drive down
it's
Grand
50,
Street.
it's 50 yards away, so,
Take a left
on
Hannon.
it's empty. Underutilized, too bad that people just don't follow the signs and park in an empty lot.
Thanks, Counselor. Counselor Kroll?
Thank you. I just had one quick question, and it's quick. I'm not saying it was said, but it's kind of the way that I heard it. I-cubed? Craig, and I know you're an expert in this area. What I heard was that it was like a state grant. My understanding was it was a state funding source that would be available. This is going way back in the memory bank, too, like way back when we were contemplating this on the streetworks. A funding source that would be available to a city or town. I don't know if it was a low or no interest loan, but it was basically like an economic empowerment funding source, that your qualification would be on whether or not you were producing enough net new commercial growth. Is that?
Counselor, the I-cubed, it is a grant from the state since they pay for it.
So it's
The way
going.
they fund it internally is they look at the project and look at the net new income tax revenue and net new sales tax revenue from that project or a group of projects, whatever it might be. Net new is new to the Commonwealth.
Right.
So it's jobs that otherwise aren't here now or otherwise wouldn't be here, and it's sales that's not being moved around from someplace else in the state and just moved over here. So it has to be new activity. What they do is you end up applying for it, and you create a model and say, we're going to create X number of jobs, and so many of them, because they're in different industries and so on, are going to be new to the state. And the retail is going to sell so much stuff, and maybe grocery has a low, what they call a displacement rate. Others have a high rate because they're not here in the state. You add that all up, and it comes out to an annual revenue stream, which has to be sufficient to cover the debt service on a bond that the state will issue to pay the city that grant at 1.25 times the debt service. So if it's $1 million a year debt service, you have to have net revenue of $1,250,000 to cover that. And they will then give you the money. However, they come back every year and look at that and calculate it out, and if there's a shortfall, the city is on the hook for that shortfall.
Will the diff in this particular
For
exercise?
the I cubed.
Yeah, but to cover the shortfall, potentially the diff funds would cover that shortfall and/or the general
It
funds,
would-
correct?
that would-
I mean,
again, it would
policy
be a budget.
decision, I
That
get
would
it.
be a
See, I
budget
always lead
decision.
you down these policy decision rabbit holes.
Right.
I get it, understood. But it's not free money.
It's not free money.
Right.
Well, it is free if the jobs are there and if
Correct.
their sales are there.
There's a risk with it, right.
And what it is, and I think the important thing to point out, you're not talking about, regular, retail jobs and stuff like that. It's really targeted to get high-quality jobs that aren't in the state now. Biomed, high technology, medical jobs, those are the types of jobs that the state wants to grow and gets the biggest bang for their buck out of. So if it are those kinds of jobs, then the opportunity to get to diff goes up dramatically.
But
As
you're
opposed
not,
to- if you relocated a business that's already in Massachusetts, that's an Andover, let's say, and they come down and put over here, they
It's
won't
not
count.
attractive to the
They don't
state.
count.
It's already paying, right? Yeah, so alternatively, they're looking to finance project infrastructure, say like a commercial building. They're not looking to finance a parking garage.
No, how you use it for public infrastructure to support
Regardless,
that
and that's
project.
completely subjective.
Well, yeah, it's
Okay.
been used for parking garages throughout Boston and elsewhere, so.
Gotcha, okay.
Okay.
It's just been a while, so appreciate it. You bet. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Kroll. I think that wraps it up tonight. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Geary. Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Thank you, Mr. Seymour. We have a lot of questions, obviously, that need to be answered, and we'll look forward to having those answers before we schedule our next meeting, which we'll hope to do. We've got a lot of things coming up, so we'll hope to do it by early May. Okay? Thanks very much. Concludes this meeting. Finance Committee at 10:10.